Marcus Aurelius' story does not begin with the image most people hold of him, an emperor seated on a Roman throne, writing words that would echo across centuries. Instead, it begins with a childhood shaped by gentleness, structure, and a sense of responsibility that matured long before power ever reached his hands. He was born in 121 CE in a wealthy family tied closely to the imperial circle, yet his early life carried an atmosphere of restraint rather than extravagance. The household was comfortable but disciplined, emphasizing character, calm habits, and thoughtful conduct. Even as a boy, Marcus seemed to prefer silence over noise, reflection over play, and careful observation over impulsive action. His family noticed this early, describing him as serious, attentive, and unusually introspective. From the beginning, Marcus was surrounded by people who encouraged education as a way to shape inner stability. His grandfather, a respected consular figure, embodied dignity and steadiness that Marcus quietly absorbed. His mother, known for intelligence and moral strength, set an example of generosity and calm presence. These influences became the foundation of the temperament he later used to govern an empire. He learned that strength did not need to be loud, and that leadership began long before authority was granted. In the structured halls of his family estate, he developed a habit of observing people, their moods, their decisions, and the consequences of their choices. These early impressions would form the first building blocks of the philosophy that later defined him. One of the most defining shifts in his childhood came from his introduction to philosophy. Unlike many children his age, Marcus was drawn to it not out of duty, but out of an instinctive alignment. He found comfort in ideas that clarified how one should live, how one should treat others, and how one should manage one's own inner world. Philosophy to him was not a subject, but a companion. His tutors, recognizing this inclination, gradually introduced Stoic principles, ideas centered on discipline, clarity, and calm acceptance. Marcus absorbed them with surprising maturity. The world seemed to open up not just as a place to navigate, but as a place to understand deeply. Despite living in a city defined by noise and ambition, Marcus cultivated personal habits that set him apart from other children of noble birth. He slept on a simple bed, or sometimes on the floor. He avoided indulgent foods. He preferred quiet study to celebrations. These choices were not forced upon him. Rather, they reflected a shaping internal compass. He was learning to live with intention, not driven by desire, but by a sense of inner order. Even at a young age, he practiced small acts of discipline that made him feel more grounded, more prepared for whatever life would offer or take away. Rome itself was a powerful teacher during this time. The city around him was massive, alive with markets, voices, and the constant movement of soldiers, merchants, philosophers, and visitors from across the empire. Marcus moved through this environment with thoughtful curiosity, paying attention to small interactions as much as large events. He watched political debates, military rituals, and religious ceremonies. He noticed how easily people were swayed by emotions or ambitions. He learned that the world was full of unexpected turns, and that only a stable mind could navigate them steadily. Though he was still far from the throne, these early experiences were preparing him for a life that would demand exceptional balance. His father died when Marcus was very young, a loss that left an imprint not through trauma, but through a growing understanding of how fragile life could be. He was raised largely by his mother and grandfather, who ensured he grew into someone capable of handling responsibility with grace. Marcus often reflected later in life on the qualities he admired in them: kindness, calm, patience, and moral integrity. These reflections became some of the earliest elements in the notes he would one day write to himself, now known as meditations. But long before he wrote those words, he lived the principles quietly, absorbing examples of virtue in the people who guided him. His education expanded beyond philosophy. Marcus learned literature, law, rhetoric, and the history of the empire he was expected to serve. But while many students viewed these subjects as stepping stones toward ambition, Marcus approached them as tools for deeper understanding. He wanted to know how people thought, what motivated human behavior, and why societies succeeded or failed. These studies helped him see patterns in history, patterns of leadership, conflict, and transformation. Even as a child, he seemed to understand that every action taken by those in power shaped the lives of countless others. This awareness grew steadily, giving him a quiet sense of responsibility long before he held any official title. One of the most significant influences during these years was Emperor Hadrian. He recognized Marcus's potential early and took an interest in shaping his future. Hadrian arranged for Marcus to be trained among the best teachers of the era, ensuring his education was steeped in both intellectual depth and practical preparation. This imperial attention placed Marcus in a unique position, still a boy, but already seen as someone destined for important roles. Despite this, Marcus never allowed excitement or pride to cloud his judgment. Instead, he responded with humility and an even stronger commitment to self-discipline. He saw expectations as obligations rather than rewards. As Marcus approached adolescence, his philosophical identity deepened. He tried adopting the dress and lifestyle of a full Stoic, living with minimal comfort and practicing steady self-control. His tutors gently reminded him that philosophy was not about extremes, but about clarity and purpose. Still, the young Marcus felt that living simply helped him stay connected to what mattered. He refined his habits not out of imitation, but to strengthen an inner structure he felt was necessary for a meaningful life. These practices gave him a sense of steadiness that he carried into every phase that followed. Roman society at the time was complex, filled with shifting alliances, political unrest, and social expectations. Marcus grew aware that any leadership, required resilience and impartiality. He watched adults around him struggle with ambition, fear, and competition, and he stated quietly to himself that he would not let such forces consume him. He wanted to understand the nature of power before accepting it. His childhood, therefore, became more than a period of growth. It became a training ground for his sense of duty, a foundation that prepared him for an extraordinary future. Toward the end of his early years, Marcus was formally connected to the imperial succession line. This moment, though monumental, did not disrupt his calm temperament. To him, the possibility of becoming emperor was not a prize, but a responsibility, one he intended to meet with the same careful thought that guided all his earlier decisions. The household around him recognized his steadiness, noting that he seemed less interested in the privileges of his birth and more interested in learning how to live well. Even as the world began to expect great things from him, Marcus remained anchored in the quiet lessons of his upbringing. His early life, shaped by philosophy, example, and personal discipline, formed the foundation of the leader he would eventually become. Marcus Aurelius was growing into someone who understood that true strength began within, long before it was tested by external challenges. The next stages of his life would draw heavily from this period, as his calm childhood prepared him for the complex and demanding world that awaited him. Marcus Aurelius's adolescence unfolded with a tone of increasing clarity, as though each year added another quiet layer to the internal structure he was building. Rome was changing around him, growing louder, wealthier, and more complex. Yet Marcus moved through it with an unhurried steadiness. His tutors often remarked that he approached learning as if it were a lifelong calling rather than a temporary duty. This unusual seriousness did not make him isolated. Instead, it gave him a calm presence that others found grounding. He seemed to understand, even at a young age, that life demanded more reflection than reaction, more patience than haste. In the midst of a bustling city, He became someone who observed deeply before responding. His education expanded rapidly during these years, shaped by some of the most respected teachers of the era. One of the earliest influences was Diognetus, who introduced Marcus to the Stoic way of thinking with gentle guidance rather than strict instruction. Diognetus encouraged him to focus on what he could control, to question his assumptions, and to look beneath the surface of everyday experiences. Under his influence, Marcus learned that philosophy was not a distant discipline reserved for scholars, but a practical framework for living with integrity. These lessons left a profound impression, becoming part of Marcus's daily habits even before he realized how deeply they would shape his future. Another important teacher entered his life around this period, Junius Rusticus. Rusticus was stern, thoughtful, and honest in a way that Marcus admired immediately. Where Diognetus had planted the seeds of philosophical curiosity, Rusticus offered a structure that made Stoicism feel both accessible and essential. He introduced Marcus to Epictetus, whose teachings emphasized clarity, self-control, and the discipline of the mind. The young student took to these ideas naturally, reading them not with the enthusiasm of someone chasing novelty, but with the calm determination of someone who had found a lifelong guide. Rusticus also modeled the virtue of speaking plainly and living consistently, traits Marcus would later associate with genuine wisdom. Under the guidance of these teachers, Marcus's habits became more deliberate. He woke early, studied with focus, and reflected each evening on how he had lived during the day. He practiced a form of personal review, quietly examining which actions aligned with his values and which did not. These reflections were not filled with self-criticism, but with a gentle commitment to improvement. Marcus understood that becoming better required honesty, not harshness, and that growth was achieved through steady effort rather than dramatic transformation. This patient mindset remained with him, shaping the tone of the writings he would later compose during the most difficult years of his reign. As he matured, Marcus's relationship with philosophy deepened into a calm reliance. He found solace in the idea that one's inner world could remain stable even when external events shifted unpredictably. This belief gave him an unusual sense of emotional independence. While many young nobles of his era tied their happiness to status, entertainment, or ambition, Marcus learned to cultivate contentment from within. He practiced the Stoic principle of recognizing what was in his control, his thoughts, actions, and character, and releasing concern over what he could not change. This approach helped him navigate the expectations placed on him as a rising figure in Roman society. Around this time, Emperor Hadrian's interest in Marcus intensified. Hadrian was a complex and sometimes unpredictable leader, yet he possessed sharp judgment when identifying talent among the youth of the empire. He saw in Marcus a combination of intellect, discipline, and moral steadiness that was rare among the nobility. Rather than push Marcus toward power abruptly, Hadrian arranged a slow, careful progression, ensuring he received the guidance he needed to become not only capable, but composed. This mentorship, though indirect, became one of the most important influences in Marcus's early development. Hadrian's recognition led to Marcus being placed under the supervision of Antoninus Pius, whom Hadrian adopted as his successor. Antoninus was known for his calm disposition, fairness, and stability, qualities that resonated deeply with Marcus's own emerging character. When Antoninus adopted Marcus as his son and heir, it marked a turning point in his life. The role came with prestige, but Marcus viewed it primarily as an expansion of responsibility. He understood that he was now formally tied to the future of the empire, and he committed himself to embodying the virtues he believed a leader should possess. Life in Antoninus's household provided a new environment for observation and refinement. Marcus learned not only from his tutors but from watching Antoninus himself. He admired his adoptive father's patience, consistency, and sense of duty. Antoninus ruled by example, demonstrating that strength could be expressed through restraint and that a leader did not need to assert dominance loudly to be effective. Marcus noted these qualities carefully, adding them to the growing list of traits he hoped to cultivate in himself. The household became a training ground, not through harsh instruction, but through steady exposure to a model of balanced leadership. Despite the increasing formality of his position, Marcus maintained his preference for simplicity. He continued practicing Stoic exercises, limiting luxuries, focusing on gratitude, and training his mind to remain even-tempered. Yet these choices never made him distant or severe. Those around him often described him as warm in a quiet way, thoughtful in conversation, and sincere in his interactions. His humility was striking given his status, but it was not an affected modesty. It was a natural extension of his belief that no title or privilege could alter the basic human experience of struggle, growth, and impermanence. During this phase, Marcus began to encounter the political realities of Rome. He observed how decisions made in the Senate affected regions far beyond the city, how alliances formed and dissolved, and how even minor conflicts could shape the stability of the empire. Though he was not yet involved directly, these observations reinforced his belief that leadership required clarity of thought and steadiness of character. He understood that reacting emotionally or impulsively could have consequences far greater than those faced by ordinary citizens. The weight of this responsibility settled into his consciousness gradually, strengthening his commitment to developing the inner qualities necessary for wise rule. Marcus's adolescence was also marked by the beginning of his formal training in rhetoric. Rome valued oratory highly, seeing it as an essential skill for anyone who wished to influence public life. Marcus studied under renowned teachers, learning how to express ideas clearly, structure arguments logically, and remain composed while speaking before others. Although he was naturally reserved, he approached rhetoric with determination, viewing it not as a performance skill, but as a way to communicate with honesty and precision. He learned to choose words carefully, not to impress, but to convey truth. These years revealed another aspect of Marcus's character, his willingness to learn from everyone, not just from his most famous teachers. He often mentioned the small lessons he picked up from household staff, family members, and ordinary citizens. From one person he learned patience, from another humility, from another generosity. Marcus understood that wisdom was not confined to those with titles or formal education. His openness to learning created a kind of intellectual quietness, a readiness to absorb insight from the world around him without judgment or pride. This habit made him unusually grounded for someone destined for power. Time spent with peers also influenced Marcus in subtle ways. Many young nobles were drawn to competition, wealth, and political maneuvering, but Marcus observed these tendencies with calm distance. He was not dismissive of others. He simply recognized that their pursuits did not align with the life he envisioned for himself. Rather than criticizing or separating himself dramatically, he remained steady, focusing on cultivating inner qualities rather than outward displays. His friendships were sincere but selective, built on shared values rather than convenience or ambition. These relationships would later become sources of stability during the pressures of imperial life. As Marcus grew older, his life began to balance between study, responsibility, and observation. He assisted Antoninus in small administrative matters, learning the rhythms of governance without the burden of final authority. These tasks offered him a quiet preview of what his future might hold. He learned how petitions were handled, how disputes were resolved, and how decisions required careful thought even when the correct path seemed obvious. This early involvement prepared him for the more demanding challenges he would later inherit. Despite the increasing seriousness of his obligations, Marcus maintained a strong connection to his philosophical grounding. He often returned to simple exercises of reflection, reminding himself of the impermanence of life, the importance of virtue, and the need to remain present. These practices helped him cope with stress, uncertainty, and the expectations placed on him. They also helped him form a stable identity that did not depend on external circumstances. Philosophy became the constant thread woven through every stage of his development. His transition into early adulthood marked the end of his purely formative years and the beginning of active preparation for leadership. Although he had not yet ascended to power, the shape of his future was becoming clearer. Marcus approached this transition with calm seriousness. He understood that the empire he would one day help govern was vast, diverse, and full of challenges. Instead of feeling overwhelmed, he focused on what he could do in the present, learning, observing, refining his character, and staying true to the principles that had guided him since childhood. Marcus Aurelius' transition from youth to early adulthood unfolded with a quiet sense of inevitability. Though he had been raised among Rome's elite, the full meaning of his place in the imperial succession did not settle in all at once. Instead, it grew gradually, like a dim light coming into focus. When Antoninus Pius adopted Marcus as his son, the decision shaped the path ahead with unmistakable clarity. Marcus understood that he was no longer simply a promising young noble. He was a future leader whose life would be intertwined with the stability of the empire itself. Yet he approached this shift not with outward excitement or ambition, but with a measured calm that reflected years of philosophical preparation. Life in the household of Antoninus brought new rhythms and responsibilities. The emperor was known for his steadiness, patience, and careful governance, qualities that resonated deeply with Marcus. Their relationship was respectful and composed, built on mutual understanding rather than emotional intensity. Antoninus treated Marcus as both a student and a future partner in leadership, involving him in matters of administration at a pace that felt deliberate and thoughtful. Marcus observed him closely, studying the way he made decisions, responded to challenges, and maintained composure in the face of uncertainty. These lessons were not dramatic moments, but consistent impressions that shaped Marcus's understanding of what true leadership required. One of the first significant changes Marcus experienced was an increase in his public duties. As an heir, he began attending meetings of the Senate, not as a passive observer, but as someone expected to contribute meaningfully. His early appearances were marked by a quiet confidence. He did not speak more than necessary, nor did he attempt to impose himself on discussions. Instead, he listened carefully, absorbing the nuances of political debate and observing how seasoned senators conducted themselves. He learned how patience could diffuse tension, how clarity could guide deliberation, and how the temperament of a single individual could influence the tone of an entire assembly. These insights strengthened his resolve to cultivate an inner calm that would remain steady under pressure. Rhetorical training became even more important during this period. Marcus's teachers pushed him to refine not only the content of his ideas, but also the clarity of his delivery. He practiced speaking with precision, avoiding unnecessary embellishments and focusing on conveying meaning with honesty. This approach aligned naturally with his philosophical beliefs. Marcus viewed eloquence not as a way to impress, but as a means of serving truth. His speeches reflected this simplicity. Those who listened to him often remarked that his words felt sincere, free from the ornate style many young nobles adopted. This restrained rhetoric would become one of his most recognizable traits as a leader. During these early years of preparation, Marcus developed a deeper relationship with Lucius Verus, the other heir adopted by Antoninus Pius. Though different in temperament, Lucius being more sociable and inclined toward leisure, The two young men formed a partnership that would later define the early years of their reign. Marcus appreciated Lucius's openness and good nature, while Lucius admired Marcus's seriousness and discipline. Their bond was not built on similarity, but on complementarity. This relationship taught Marcus the importance of understanding others without attempting to change them, a lesson that later proved invaluable when the responsibilities of co-emperorship demanded flexibility and cooperation. As Marcus grew more involved in imperial duties, he balanced these responsibilities with ongoing philosophical study. The works of Epictetus, taught to him by Rusticus, became a constant reference. Marcus read them not as abstract ideas, but as guidance for the life he expected to face. The Stoic emphasis on virtue, resilience, and emotional clarity helped him manage the increasing pressures of his role. Whenever he felt tension or uncertainty, he returned to the idea that the only true possession one has is one's own judgment. This belief allowed him to maintain inner stability even when outward circumstances grew complicated. He began shaping a mental discipline that would later carry him through crises far more intense than anything he faced in these formative years. One of the most important aspects of Marcus's preparation was learning to balance the expectations of the imperial office with his preference for a simple, disciplined life. As heir, he was expected to attend ceremonies, participate in public events, and maintain a visible presence among Rome's citizens. Though he fulfilled these obligations with grace, he continued to prioritize modesty and restraint. He kept his lifestyle simple, avoided unnecessary luxury, and remained accessible to those who sought his counsel. This consistency made him respected even before he took power. People sensed his sincerity, and it distinguished him from others who used public roles to seek personal elevation. Marcus's marriage to Faustina the Younger marked another significant shift in his life. Faustina, the daughter of Antoninus Pius, was known for her beauty, intelligence, and strong personality. Their marriage created a deeper bond between Marcus and the imperial family. Though not without challenges, their relationship offered Marcus emotional grounding and a sense of personal continuity amidst growing obligations. Faustina's presence brought warmth to Marcus's otherwise disciplined lifestyle, and their family life gradually expanded with the birth of their children. These domestic responsibilities required Marcus to balance his philosophical ideals with the practical realities of family life, a dynamic he handled with characteristic steadiness. During this time, Marcus's administrative involvement grew more substantial. He assisted in reviewing legal cases, advising provincial governors, and managing financial matters. These tasks demanded long hours of reading, discussion, and careful deliberation. Marcus approached each responsibility with patience, recognizing that even small decisions could have far-reaching consequences. He learned the importance of fairness, consistency, and attention to detail. He also began to understand how bureaucracy, despite its frustrations, served as the backbone of the empire's stability. This awareness helped him appreciate the value of methodical governance rather than impulsive reform. The empire itself was shifting in subtle ways during this period. Antoninus's rule was relatively peaceful compared to the turmoil that would soon arise, but tensions along the frontiers and within certain provinces signaled changes ahead. Marcus observed these developments with quiet concern, aware that leadership required vigilance even during calm times. He studied reports from military commanders, analyzed political dynamics, and prepared himself mentally for the challenges he knew were coming. His philosophical training, emphasizing acceptance of the unpredictable, gave him the steadiness needed to face these uncertainties without anxiety. By the end of this phase, Marcus had become a figure of composed maturity. His early years had shaped him into someone who approached life with careful thought and unwavering sincerity. The world around him recognized his potential, yet he remained grounded in the same values that guided him from childhood. The responsibilities of leadership were approaching quickly, but Marcus did not rush toward them. He allowed his preparation to unfold naturally, trusting that a calm and disciplined mind would serve him better than ambition or impatience. This period marked the closing of his apprenticeship and the beginning of a life defined by service to a vast and demanding empire. As Marcus entered the next phase of his journey as heir, his role became more overtly public. Rome saw him not only as a future emperor, but as a moral example, someone whose presence embodied stability and virtue. The transition from private education to public responsibility required him to navigate a broader range of expectations, yet he managed this shift with the same composed seriousness that had characterized his youth. This period of his life was defined not by dramatic events, but by a steady accumulation of experience that molded him into a leader ready to face the complexities of imperial rule. His involvement in legal affairs deepened significantly. The Roman legal system was vast and intricate, filled with petitions, disputes, precedents, and administrative nuances. Marcus spent countless hours reviewing cases, reading summaries, and listening to arguments from legal advisors. These tasks required not only knowledge, but impartiality, patience, and a commitment to justice. Marcus saw the law not simply as a tool of governance, but as a reflection of societal values. He treated each case with seriousness, understanding that real lives were shaped by the decisions rendered. His approach earned him respect from legal scholars and citizens alike, who appreciated his fairness and absence of bias. Alongside legal duties, Marcus participated more actively in military administration, though he had not yet taken direct command. He reviewed reports from frontier regions, studied strategies used by Rome's generals, and learned the complexities of supplying and organizing legions spread across vast territories. He recognized that military strength required more than force. It demanded discipline, morale, and effective leadership. Though not naturally inclined toward war, Marcus understood that protecting the empire was one of the central obligations of the imperial office. His calm, analytical style allowed him to see military matters with clarity, free from emotional fluctuations or impulsive judgment. During this time, Marcus developed a stronger partnership with Lucius Verus. Although their personalities differed, the two heirs grew into complementary figures. Lucius offered levity and social ease, where Marcus brought steadiness and reflection. Their ability to collaborate demonstrated an important skill Marcus would rely on later: the capacity to work harmoniously with individuals whose strengths differed from his own. They attended meetings together, learned administrative procedures, and shared responsibilities assigned by Antoninus Pius. This partnership showed Rome that its future leadership possessed both unity and balance, a reassuring sign during an era that valued stability. The relationship between Marcus and Antoninus continued to deepen during these years. Antoninus valued discipline and restraint, qualities that aligned naturally with Marcus's philosophy. The emperor's leadership style centered on maintaining peace, avoiding unnecessary conflict, and governing with fairness. Marcus saw in him a living demonstration of Stoic principles. Antoninus rarely displayed anger, made decisions thoughtfully, and viewed power as a duty rather than a personal achievement. Marcus absorbed these traits gradually, often reflecting on how Antoninus's quiet strength shaped the tone of the entire empire. These reflections later appeared in Marcus's writings as expressions of gratitude for the example Antoninus provided. Marcus's personal life continued to evolve as well. His family grew with the birth of several children, and though many did not survive infancy, a common tragedy in that era, Marcus approached these experiences with a steady heart, shaped by philosophical acceptance. He understood the impermanence of life and sought to meet both joy and loss with the same measured presence. His marriage to Faustina, though occasionally tested by the complexities of imperial life, provided companionship and stability. Their home balanced the demands of public duty with moments of personal connection, helping Marcus maintain a sense of humanity amidst the growing pressures of leadership. One of the most important aspects of this phase was Marcus's deepening commitment to reflection. Though he had not yet begun composing the writings that would later become meditations, he practiced the mental habits that formed its foundation. He examined his thoughts, questioned his assumptions, and reminded himself of the values he wished to embody. He avoided indulging in unnecessary desires, choosing instead to focus on actions aligned with virtue. These practices helped him maintain balance as his responsibilities increased and his world grew more demanding. They also kept him grounded, preventing the allure of power from unsettling his inner stability. The political environment of Rome during this period remained relatively stable, thanks largely to Antoninus's steady leadership. But Marcus could sense emerging tensions beneath the surface. Provinces along the empire's borders reported unrest. Economic challenges appeared intermittently. Social divisions, always present, began to shift in subtle ways. Marcus studied these developments closely, knowing that understanding them early would help him lead wisely later. His calm, analytical approach made him particularly effective at recognizing patterns and anticipating potential challenges. In addition to administrative and political duties, Marcus continued his philosophical training. His teachers guided him through advanced Stoic concepts, practical wisdom, emotional discipline, duty to the common good, and the importance of accepting fate with clarity. Marcus embraced these ideas wholeheartedly, not as a theoretical pursuit, but as preparation for the challenges he knew he would one day face as emperor. These lessons did not make him detached. Instead, they made him more engaged, more present, and more attuned to the needs of others. As the end of Antoninus's reign approached, Marcus found himself gradually stepping into roles that required more authority. He handled more legal cases independently, represented the emperor in political matters, and became increasingly visible to both the Senate and the Roman people. His demeanor remained calm and composed, strengthening the public's trust in him. They saw in Marcus a leader who valued steadiness over spectacle, virtue over ambition, and service over personal gain. These qualities distinguished him at a time when Rome valued reliability above all. By the conclusion of this chapter, Marcus had evolved from a promising young student into a mature leader prepared for the immense responsibilities ahead. His early education, philosophical grounding, and steady preparation under Antoninus had shaped him into someone capable of guiding an empire with clarity and calm discipline. The world around him was on the verge of change, and soon he and Lucius Verus would inherit a realm facing new challenges. Yet Marcus approached this transition just as he had approached every phase of his life, with patience, reflection, and a steady commitment to his values. As the years of preparation unfolded beneath the calm governance of Antoninus Pius, Marcus Aurelius grew steadily into the role that awaited him. The empire during this period experienced one of its most peaceful eras, a time later remembered as part of the golden stretch of the 5 good emperors. But all peaceful reigns eventually reached their final moment, and as Antoninus aged, the quiet inevitability of succession drew closer. Marcus sensed the change gradually. The emperor's steps became slower, his time in public more limited, and the responsibilities he entrusted to Marcus grew with increasing frequency. Marcus did not view these shifts with impatience or fear. Instead, he absorbed them with the same calm sense of duty that had guided him since youth. The household of Antoninus adapted to these changes with quiet, respectful adjustments. Meetings became shorter, schedules more flexible, and conversations took on a tone of gentle urgency. Marcus spent more time by Antoninus's side, learning from him not through formal instruction but through shared presence. Their relationship had matured over the years into one of mutual understanding, shaped by a blend of mentorship, familial connection, and shared responsibility. Marcus admired Antoninus deeply, not for grandeur or military success, but for the steady humility with which he carried the burdens of leadership. Even as the emperor's strength faded, his mind remained clear, and Marcus watched carefully, absorbing the final lessons of a man he considered a model of virtue. When Antoninus fell gravely ill, the transition was handled with the same composure that marked his entire reign. The Senate and the imperial household prepared for the inevitable, maintaining stability to prevent unrest. Marcus understood the gravity of this moment. Though he had spent years preparing, stepping fully into leadership meant accepting a weight that cannot truly be understood until it rests upon one's shoulders. He remained close to Antoninus during the emperor's last days, attending to matters of state, managing communications, and ensuring that the empire's administrative functions continued without disruption. The emperor's passing unfolded quietly, without spectacle, in keeping with the character of his life. Rome did not erupt in chaos. Instead, it paused in solemn recognition of a respected ruler. Marcus, now at the threshold of his new role, allowed himself a moment of private reflection before stepping into public duty. He grieved not with dramatic display, but with the measured inward composure that Stoicism had taught him. He had lost a mentor, a father, and a model of leadership. Yet he met the moment with acceptance, understanding that every life, even one that shaped an empire, moves within the natural cycle of beginning and end. As the empire looked toward its future, Marcus honored the intentions of Antoninus by insisting that Lucius Verus rule alongside him as co-emperor. This decision was unusual in Roman history, yet it reflected Marcus's belief in shared responsibility and his commitment to fulfilling the arrangements set by Hadrian and Antoninus. The Senate approved the dual emperorship, marking a rare moment when Rome acknowledged two leaders of equal rank. Though Marcus was widely regarded as the more philosophically grounded and disciplined figure, he ensured that Lucius received full recognition and authority. The formal ceremonies that followed were dignified but not excessive. Marcus approached them with calm seriousness, understanding that rituals served to reassure the public and affirm continuity. He offered prayers, attended Senate sessions, and participated in public observances honoring Antoninus. Citizens watched him with respect, seeing in him a leader whose steadiness mirrored that of the ruler they had just lost. In their eyes, Marcus represented continuity, stability, and the promise of moral integrity. Once the traditional observances were complete, Marcus and Lucius began the work of governing together. Their relationship, built over years of preparation, allowed them to collaborate effectively despite their contrasting personalities. Marcus brought structure, analysis, and philosophical discipline. Lucius contributed social ease, adaptability, and a more relaxed temperament that helped maintain balance within the imperial court. Marcus understood that effective leadership required not only strength of character, but also harmony among those who governed. He valued Lucius' companionship not as a political calculation, but as a reminder that leadership need not be a solitary path. One of Marcus's earliest priorities after assuming leadership was to continue the peaceful policies of Antoninus. He believed profoundly in maintaining stability, fostering economic strength, and treating provincial populations with fairness. He resisted unnecessary expenditures, discouraged extravagance within the imperial household, and focused on sustaining the systems that supported Rome's prosperity. These choices reflected his Stoic values, emphasizing moderation and responsibility rather than personal elevation. He understood that the empire was large, diverse, and filled with people whose livelihoods depended on thoughtful governance. Yet even as Marcus settled into his role, new challenges emerged at the empire's frontiers. Reports arrived from the eastern provinces, detailing conflicts that threatened regional stability. Tribal groups along the borders were becoming restless. Political tensions in distant kingdoms hinted at the possibility of alliances forming against Rome. Marcus recognized that these developments demanded careful attention. Though he valued peace deeply, he understood that peace could not be sustained without vigilance. He and Lucius began reviewing military strategies, evaluating the condition of the legions, and consulting with commanders to address emerging threats. For Marcus, this period represented the beginning of a leadership journey shaped by responsibility rather than desire. He had never sought power, yet he embraced its obligations with sincerity. The philosophical foundation he had built over years of study now became a practical guide. He reminded himself daily to act with justice, temperance, and clarity. He viewed each decision as an opportunity to uphold virtue, even when circumstances demanded difficult choices. In these early months as emperor, Marcus's leadership revealed the same humble strength that characterized his youth. In the early years of his reign, Marcus Aurelius governed with a sense of balance and intentionality that reflected both his character and his philosophical upbringing. Together with Lucius Verus, he inherited an empire that had enjoyed decades of relative peace. Infrastructure was strong, the economy was stable, and the administrative systems developed by previous emperors were functioning smoothly. Marcus took care not to disrupt this order. Instead, he prioritized maintaining continuity, ensuring that Rome's well-being depended on prudent leadership rather than drastic reform. He spent long hours reviewing reports from provincial governors, studying legal petitions, and refining administrative practices. Marcus believed that even the smallest adjustments could strengthen the empire, if made with thoughtfulness and precision. His approach was neither abrupt nor dramatic. It unfolded through steady application of clarity, fairness, and disciplined attention. Officials who met with him often remarked that he possessed an unusual ability to listen quietly, absorb details, and reach decisions without haste. His calm presence became a defining feature of his leadership, instilling confidence in those who served under him. Marcus also remained deeply committed to education and cultural development. He supported philosophers, writers, and teachers throughout the empire, believing that intellectual growth strengthened civic character. He encouraged public access to learning, sponsored lectures, and fostered an environment where thoughtful discussion was valued. For Marcus, philosophy was not a private pursuit, but a tool that could enrich society. He believed that a well-educated population contributed to stability by cultivating reason and virtue. This belief guided his support for institutions that preserved Rome's intellectual traditions. Despite the peaceful tone of his domestic governance, Marcus was increasingly aware of rising tensions beyond Rome's borders. Reports from the eastern frontiers described growing conflicts involving the Parthian Empire, a formidable power that had long rivaled Rome's influence in the region. Initial skirmishes soon escalated into a broader threat that required decisive action. Marcus, recognizing the importance of stability in the east, appointed Lucius Verus to lead the military response. This decision allowed Marcus to remain in Rome, maintaining the administrative structure of the empire, while Lucius commanded the legions. Marcus knew that Lucius, though less disciplined, possessed qualities that made him effective in the military matters. He understood people well, navigated social dynamics easily, and inspired loyalty among soldiers. Marcus trusted him and supported the appointment fully. Before Lucius departed, the two co-emperors discussed strategy extensively. Marcus emphasized the importance of protecting civilians, maintaining discipline among the troops, and upholding Rome's values even in wartime. His guidance was measured and clear, shaped by philosophical principles rather than impulsive fear or aggression. Lucius's departure marked the beginning of a period of separation for the co-emperors, yet their partnership remained strong. Marcus continued sending letters of encouragement and advice, while Lucius provided detailed updates on the military campaign. Marcus reviewed these updates carefully, balancing trust with attentiveness. He recognized that the outcomes of distant battles would shape the empire's future, but he refused to let anxiety disrupt the calm order of governance at home. In this way, Marcus showed that effective leadership required composure not only during peace, but also during uncertainty. During Lucius's absence, Marcus handled both administrative responsibilities and domestic challenges. One of these challenges involved managing public expectations. Citizens often looked to the emperor for reassurance during wartime, and Marcus provided it through steady presence and thoughtful communication. He continued meeting with senators, addressing legal matters, and responding to provincial concerns. He remained visible without becoming theatrical, holding firmly to the belief that consistency, not dramatic declarations, was the foundation of a stable society. As months passed, Rome began receiving positive news from the Eastern campaign. Lucius's leadership, supported by competent generals, led to a series of successful operations against the Parthian forces. The victories brought relief and optimism to the empire. Marcus sent messages expressing pride and gratitude, acknowledging Lucius's efforts while remaining humble in his own role. He recognized that leadership was a shared burden, and he valued the cooperative spirit that allowed both emperors to contribute according to their strengths. Yet, beneath the relief of military success, new concerns were quietly forming. Soldiers returning from the east brought with them an unfamiliar illness, one that began spreading through the camps and into civilian populations. At first, the sickness seemed manageable, but its rapid growth soon revealed a deeper threat. Marcus monitored reports carefully, aware that disease could destabilize regions more effectively than any external enemy. The calm that marked the early years of his reign was beginning to shift. A subtle tension entered the edges of the empire, signaling that difficult times were approaching. As clouds of uncertainty gathered, Marcus maintained his commitment to clarity, diligence, and inner steadiness. He continued to govern with humility, supporting his people and preparing himself for the trials ahead. Though he did not yet know the full extent of the challenges he would face, war, famine, plague, and personal loss, he sensed that his philosophical training would soon become more than a guide for personal life. It would become the anchor upon which the stability of the entire empire depended. The early years of Marcus Aurelius's rule had been marked by balance and cooperation, supported by the steady partnership between himself and Lucius Verus. Their joint leadership had guided the empire through a period of military tension in the east, culminating in a victory that reaffirmed Rome's influence. Yet, as the triumph settled into the historical memory of the capital, a new challenge began to reveal itself, one not forged by armies or political conflict, but carried quietly by returning soldiers. The illness that entered Rome during this time would reshape the course of Marcus's reign and become one of the defining crises of the era. The disease arrived gradually, at first unnoticed amid the celebrations of the Parthian victory. Soldiers who returned from the eastern provinces carried symptoms that seemed initially like an ordinary ailment. A fever here, a cough there, a slow spread from one camp to another, but the pattern shifted quickly. Entire cohorts became bedridden. Civilians near military settlements reported rising cases. Physicians struggled to treat symptoms they had rarely seen before. The illness moved with unsettling efficiency, crossing regions, social classes, and climates with equal ease. What began as isolated discomfort soon grew into what history would know as the Antonine Plague. Marcus Aurelius approached the situation with the same calm seriousness that characterized every responsibility he faced. He did not attempt to dismiss the reports or minimize the severity of the illness. Instead, he focused on gathering accurate information. He met with physicians, consulted advisors, reviewed provincial communications, and studied the spread of the disease carefully. Marcus understood that panic would only deepen the crisis, yet he also recognized the importance of acknowledging the truth. His leadership during this time reflected a subtle balance, steady reassurance blended with transparent assessment of the challenges ahead. As the plague spread through Rome, the city's atmosphere shifted noticeably. Markets remained open, but the energy of public life dimmed. Families kept closer watch on one another. Temples filled with citizens offering prayers for protection and guidance. Marcus's presence became especially important during these months. He continued holding meetings, overseeing legal matters, and addressing the Senate, all while ensuring that public health concerns were treated with urgency. His calm demeanor helped maintain order in a time when uncertainty threatened to undermine the stability of the empire. One of Marcus's most difficult responsibilities involved allocating resources to support the affected regions. The plague strained food supplies, disrupted trade routes, and left labor shortages in both cities and agricultural areas. Marcus worked with provincial leaders to coordinate shipments, distribute grain, and ensure that essential industries continued functioning. These tasks demanded meticulous planning and constant adaptation. Marcus approached them with patience, understanding that logistical clarity was essential when dealing with a crisis that touched every corner of the empire. Despite his composed exterior, Marcus was deeply affected by the suffering he witnessed. His philosophical training taught him to accept hardship, but it did not make him indifferent to pain. He saw families grieving, communities disrupted, and entire cohorts of soldiers weakened. He understood that the empire's resilience depended not only on military strength or political order, but on the well-being of ordinary people. Marcus responded with compassion, emphasizing support for the vulnerable and urging those in positions of power to act with humanity. His leadership during this time demonstrated a quiet moral conviction that reinforced the respect he already held among the population. The plague also affected the imperial household. Members of the court fell ill, advisors struggled with symptoms, and administrative delays became common. Marcus continued working consistently, even as those around him suffered. He did not retreat into seclusion or delegate responsibilities excessively. Instead, he adapted his schedule, balancing public duties with careful management of the crisis. His days grew longer, filled with correspondence, emergency decisions, and philosophical reflection. These reflections helped him maintain clarity while confronting a challenge that offered no easy solutions. Throughout this period, Marcus remained committed to maintaining civil order. He understood that fear could lead to social unrest, particularly when illness spread unpredictably. To prevent panic, he ensured that communication remained steady and transparent. Provincial leaders were kept informed and the Senate received regular updates. Marcus encouraged citizens to follow guidance from physicians and to support one another with patience and understanding. His leadership emphasized unity rather than division, a tone that proved essential during months when uncertainty could easily have fractured the empire's cohesion. The economic impact of the plague soon became impossible to ignore. Markets slowed, agricultural production faltered, and tax revenues declined. Marcus responded by adjusting fiscal policies, reducing burdens on affected regions, and supporting essential infrastructure. He refused to implement measures that would have placed undue pressure on citizens struggling to survive. Instead, he balanced economic necessity with compassion, recognizing that the empire's strength depended on the resilience of its people. These decisions reflected his long-standing belief that leadership must serve the common good, even when circumstances demanded difficult trade-offs. Despite the severity of the crisis, Marcus continued fostering cultural and intellectual life where possible. He supported physicians in their research, encouraged scholars to document the phenomenon, and preserved funding for educational institutions. He believed that understanding the world, even in its most challenging moments, was a form of resilience. By supporting these efforts, Marcus ensured that the empire did not retreat into fear, but continued seeking knowledge and solutions. As the plague persisted, Marcus's relationship with Lucius Verus became increasingly important. Lucius returned to Rome during this period, bringing first-hand knowledge from the eastern provinces. The co-emperors collaborated closely, sharing responsibilities and supporting one another. Lucius's presence provided Marcus with both practical assistance and emotional balance. Their partnership rose to meet the crisis with steady determination, demonstrating that the empire still had leaders capable of guiding it through adversity. But the plague was only the first of many challenges that would test Marcus's composure. Even as it continued spreading, disturbances along the northern frontier signaled the beginning of new threats. Germanic tribes were gathering strength, driven by shifting climatic patterns and internal pressures that pushed them toward Roman territory. Marcus understood that the empire was entering a period where multiple crises might unfold simultaneously. Yet he faced these developments without despair. He relied on the philosophical grounding that had shaped him since youth, reminding himself each day that he could control only his actions, not the unpredictable events around him. In these early years of hardship, Marcus Aurelius demonstrated qualities that would later define his legacy: patience, clarity, compassion, and unwavering commitment to duty. Though the challenges were formidable, he approached each with the steady belief that virtue must guide decision-making regardless of circumstance. His leadership did not eliminate the suffering caused by the plague, but it preserved the empire's cohesion during a time when fear could easily have unraveled it. As the plague continued its slow, unpredictable movement through the empire, another issue began demanding Marcus Aurelius's attention: growing instability along the northern frontier. For decades, Rome had maintained a complex relationship with the Germanic tribes situated beyond the Danube River. These tribes, diverse in culture and unified only by geography, had shown both cooperation and resistance over the years. Yet, during Marcus's early reign, external pressures pushed many of them toward greater unrest. Food shortages, environmental changes, and internal conflicts encouraged migration, and some groups began testing Rome's defenses in search of new opportunities. Marcus understood the significance of these developments. The Danubian frontier was one of the most important defensive boundaries of the empire. If destabilized, it could threaten not only the surrounding provinces, but also Rome's internal cohesion. With the plague already stressing resources and diminishing troop numbers, Marcus knew that managing this situation would require careful balance. He reviewed military reports daily, studying troop placements, fortifications, and the movements of various tribes. His concern grew steadily as evidence pointed toward an emerging crisis. When smaller incursions began occurring with greater frequency, Marcus responded with measured urgency. He arranged reinforcements for vulnerable provinces, consulted with experienced generals, and developed strategic plans for addressing potential escalations. His approach was not aggressive. He did not seek expansion or domination. Instead, he focused on maintaining stability and protecting Roman citizens. Diplomacy played a central role in these efforts. Marcus offered negotiations, support to allied tribes, and solutions aimed at preventing conflict before it unfolded. Yet he understood that diplomacy alone could not guarantee peace. especially when external pressures pushed tribal groups beyond their limits. During this time, Marcus and Lucius Verus continued working closely, though their responsibilities often differed. Lucius supported military preparations, attending strategic meetings, and consulting with commanders. His experience in the Eastern Campaign provided useful perspective, particularly regarding the logistics of large-scale troop movements. Marcus valued Lucius's practical insights and relied on him for collaborative decision-making. Though their personalities remained distinct, their partnership strengthened under the pressures of overlapping crises. Amid these developments, the plague continued to shape daily life in Rome. Troop shortages presented significant challenges, as many soldiers were unable to serve due to illness or death. Replenishing the legions required careful planning, recruitment, and training, tasks complicated by the empire's need to maintain stability in numerous regions. Marcus considered these realities with clarity, refusing to allow frustration to cloud his judgment. He reminded himself that unexpected challenges were part of leadership and that effective responses required patience, adaptability, and steady attention. As tensions escalated, tribal groups began forming alliances that increased their strength significantly. Their movements suggested coordinated pressure rather than isolated disturbances. One of the most prominent groups, the Marcomanni, emerged as a central force capable of influencing the actions of surrounding tribes. Reports indicated that they were preparing for large-scale incursions, driven by necessity as much as ambition. Marcus recognized the gravity of this development. He understood that the empire was facing not a brief disturbance, but a complex military threat shaped by migration, environmental changes, and shifting regional dynamics. In the midst of these concerns, tragedy struck the imperial household. Lucius Verus fell ill unexpectedly while returning from a provincial inspection. His condition deteriorated quickly, a pattern all too familiar during the years of the plague. Though Marcus hoped for recovery, he prepared himself inwardly for the possibility of loss. When Lucius passed away, the empire mourned deeply. Marcus grieved with quiet sincerity, reflecting on their years of partnership and shared duty. He honored Lucius publicly, praised his contributions, and ensured that his memory was respected throughout the empire. Lucius's death left Marcus as the sole emperor, a role that intensified the weight of responsibility on his shoulders. The empire now faced the dual pressures of plague and frontier instability, and Marcus understood that leadership demanded unwavering clarity. Rather than retreat into sorrow, he channeled his grief into renewed commitment. He knew the empire needed someone steady, someone who could make careful decisions, guide military strategy, and maintain moral grounding in the face of uncertainty. Marcus accepted this responsibility with the same calm resolve that had defined his entire life. The Marcomannic threat grew more serious in the months following Lucius's death. Ambitious leaders among the tribes formed coalitions capable of challenging Rome's established defenses. Marcus reviewed reports extensively, analyzing patterns and preparing for the likelihood of conflict. He consulted military commanders, assessed supply lines, and organized plans for troop deployments. His decision-making process was thorough and reflective, guided by both strategic considerations and a deep sense of duty. He did not desire war, but he understood that protecting the empire required readiness. As preparations intensified, Marcus drew strength from the philosophical principles that had shaped him since youth. He reminded himself that hardship was not an obstacle to avoid, but a natural part of life to face calmly. He practiced daily reflection, reinforcing his commitment to virtue, fairness, and resilience. These habits helped him remain clear-headed even as the empire entered one of its most challenging periods. Marcus knew that emotional steadiness was essential not only for his own well-being, but for the morale of those who depended on him. By the end of this chapter, the stage was set for a period of profound trials. The plague continued its slow spread, weakening populations and complicating logistics. The northern frontier grew increasingly unstable, with tribal alliances preparing for major movements. The death of Lucius Verus had left Marcus without the partner who had shared the burdens of leadership. Yet despite these mounting challenges, Marcus remained focused, composed, and committed to guiding the empire through the difficulties ahead. His calm resolve, shaped by decades of philosophical discipline, prepared him for the immense responsibility of confronting crisis on multiple fronts. When Marcus Aurelius made the decision to head north toward the Danubian frontier, it marked the beginning of a defining chapter in his life, one shaped by conflict, movement, and a demanding test of character. For years he had prepared Rome administratively, strengthening defenses and gathering information. But circumstances had reached a point where leadership from afar was no longer sufficient. Tribal alliances, fueled by desperation and shifting conditions, had grown increasingly bold. Raids along the border intensified, and entire settlements reported being overwhelmed by sudden incursions. Marcus understood that the stability of the empire depended on decisive, present leadership. And so, with patience and sober clarity, he prepared to leave Rome and guide the empire from the heart of the unfolding conflict. His departure was not hurried. Marcus approached this transition with the same thoughtful deliberation he applied to all responsibilities. He met with senators, organized supply chains, assigned roles to provincial leaders, and prepared guardians for his children. He took time to ensure Rome's administrative functions would continue smoothly in his absence. The city depended heavily on the emperor's presence for reassurance, and Marcus understood the need to maintain order even while far from the capital. He communicated openly with the Senate, explaining the necessity of his journey and reaffirming his commitment to Rome's welfare. His transparency eased anxieties and strengthened confidence in his leadership. Before departing, Marcus spent quiet moments reflecting on the gravity of the situation. Though he had long embraced Stoic principles, he knew that practical challenges often tested one's philosophical convictions. The Danubian frontier represented more than a military threat. It was a place where thousands of lives were being disrupted, where Roman families faced fear and uncertainty, and where tribal groups, driven by necessity, acted out of survival rather than pure aggression. Marcus did not view the conflict through a lens of hatred or personal rivalry. Instead, he approached it with a clear understanding of human complexity. The people challenging Rome were acting according to pressures and circumstances beyond their control. His task was not only to defend the empire, but to respond with fairness wherever possible. The journey north unfolded over several weeks, marked by long roads, shifting landscapes, and the gradual transformation from the structured urban life of Rome to the rugged, expansive terrain that bordered the tribes. Along the way, Marcus visited towns, spoke with local leaders, and surveyed the morale of the people. He listened carefully to their concerns: grain shortages, damaged farms, rumors of raids, and the spreading effects of the plague. These conversations guided his understanding of what the frontier provinces needed most urgently. Marcus never assumed he knew the full picture. Instead, he sought to gather insight through direct human connection, reinforcing his belief that leadership required attentive listening. As he approached the military camps near the Danube, Marcus observed the subtle tension that filled the atmosphere. Soldiers trained with heightened urgency, supply wagons moved steadily along dirt paths, and messengers carried orders across encampments. The legions were strong, but they were not untouched by the recent challenges. Many soldiers had recovered from the plague or lost companions to it. Others were young recruits who had joined to fill gaps left by illness and casualties. Marcus studied their movements, recognizing both their discipline and the emotional weight they carried. He understood the importance of restoring cohesion and ensuring that soldiers felt supported by leadership. Upon arriving at the headquarters, Marcus met with his generals to assess the situation. Reports confirmed that the Marcomanni, along with allied tribes, were regrouping with significant force. Their leaders had formed alliances that extended across regions and drew together warriors from various backgrounds. The threat was no longer a series of isolated incursions. It had become a coordinated challenge capable of breaching Roman defenses if not addressed with clarity and strength. Marcus listened to each general's perspective, weighing strategies carefully. He understood that every decision carried consequences, not only for military outcomes, but for civilians whose lives depended on the empire's protection. Marcus's leadership style in the field mirrored his approach in Rome, thoughtful, measured, and grounded in principle. He avoided impulsive reactions and discouraged unnecessary aggression. Instead, he emphasized discipline, organization, and strategic foresight. He encouraged his commanders to act with restraint when possible, reminding them that the goal was to restore stability, not to seek vengeance or unnecessary destruction. Marcus believed deeply in the value of proportional response, using force only when it was necessary to defend the empire. This approach set a tone that helped maintain order among the legions and prevented conflicts from spiraling into uncontrolled violence. Daily life along the frontier demanded a different rhythm from the routines of Rome. Marcus adapted to it pragmatically, rising early to review reports, meeting with officers, inspecting troops, and walking the campgrounds to observe conditions firsthand. He lived simply, maintaining the modest habits he had practiced since youth. His presence among the soldiers fostered respect and trust. They saw an emperor who did not isolate himself from hardship, who walked the muddy paths as they did, who shared tents rather than lavish quarters, and who faced the same cold mornings and uncertain nights. Marcus understood that leadership in wartime required visibility and sincerity. By living as the soldiers lived, he reinforced the sense of collective purpose that strengthened the legions. As weeks passed, the situation on the frontier became increasingly dynamic. Battles erupted intermittently, ranging from small skirmishes to more significant encounters. Marcus approached each development with quiet focus. He analyzed reports, consulted advisors, and adapted strategies as circumstances changed. His combination of philosophical grounding and practical decision-making allowed him to remain calm even when faced with setbacks. Soldiers who interacted with him often remarked on his ability to steady others simply through his presence, an ability that stemmed from decades of disciplined inner work. Amid the pressures of military life, Marcus continued his practice of reflection. Each night, after the camp settled into uneasy silence, he spent time reviewing his thoughts, reminding himself of the values that guided him. He reflected on justice, patience, and the impermanence of human struggles. Some of these reflections eventually became part of the meditations he recorded in his private journal, words never intended for public view, but written to steady his mind in the midst of difficulty. These quiet moments allowed him to maintain emotional clarity even when surrounded by uncertainty. They reinforced his belief that leadership required not only strategic strength, but a stable inner foundation. During this period, diplomatic exchanges with the tribes remained possible in certain regions. Marcus encouraged his generals to negotiate wherever meaningful dialogue could prevent conflict. He understood that many tribal groups were motivated by necessity, seeking land, security, or resources to support their people. When negotiations succeeded, they provided temporary stability, allowing Rome to focus resources where they were needed most. When negotiations failed, Marcus ensured that military responses were measured and strategic. He resisted calls for sweeping retaliation, choosing instead to use targeted actions designed to restore balance without escalating hostility unnecessarily. The challenges of the frontier extended beyond battlefields. Harsh weather affected supplies, illness occasionally spread through camps, and delays in transportation created disruptions. Marcus addressed these issues with steady determination. He worked with quartermasters to improve storage, adjusted supply routes to minimize risk, and supported medical teams caring for sick or injured soldiers. His attention to logistical details, though less visible than his strategic decisions, played a crucial role in maintaining the effectiveness of the legions. Marcus understood that success in war depended not only on battlefield strength, but on the quiet, consistent work that sustained armies behind the scenes. As the first major phase of the conflict unfolded, Marcus began preparing for more extensive campaigns. He recognized that the Marcomanni and their allies possessed both determination and numbers, and that the empire needed sustained effort to restore long-term stability. He planned cautiously, ensuring that every operation aligned with strategic goals rather than impulsive responses. This approach required patience, yet Marcus believed it was the most responsible path. He viewed leadership as a long-term commitment, one that demanded endurance, clarity, and moral steadiness. By the end of this part, Marcus had established his presence on the frontier and set the tone for the campaigns ahead. The challenges were significant: plague, resource shortages, and determined tribal alliances all converged to create a complex landscape. Yet Marcus remained composed. He approached each day with focus, guided by both practical demands and philosophical discipline. He knew that the path ahead would be long, but he also understood that resilience grew through consistent effort. His leadership, grounded in patience and purpose, positioned the empire to navigate the difficult years that were beginning to unfold. The opening campaigns of the Marcomannic Wars began with a series of calculated movements designed to reassert Roman control over vulnerable regions. Marcus Aurelius and his generals worked systematically, focusing first on stabilizing the provinces closest to the frontier before pushing deeper into contested territory. The initial objectives were clear: secure supply routes, regain strongholds threatened by tribal forces, and establish defensive lines capable of withstanding larger incursions. Each step required patience, coordination, and the ability to adapt quickly to shifting conditions. Early encounters with the Marcomanni and their allies were tense and unpredictable. Many tribal groups relied on mobility and intimate knowledge of the terrain, launching swift attacks before retreating into forests or across rivers. Roman forces, though disciplined, had to adjust their methods to counter these tactics. Marcus emphasized flexibility, encouraging commanders to study tribal movements, anticipate patterns, and respond with strategies suited to the environment. Rather than seeking decisive, overwhelming victories, Marcus focused on incremental progress, pushing back incursions, strengthening fortifications, and reducing the enemy's ability to operate freely. Throughout these campaigns, communication played an essential role. Marcus insisted on receiving detailed reports from his generals and sent clear instructions in return. He valued transparency and accuracy, understanding that effective leadership depended on reliable information. His letters reflected a tone of calm guidance, encouraging discipline while acknowledging the challenges soldiers faced. Marcus never demanded perfection. Instead, he sought steady improvement and responsible action. This approach helped maintain morale among the troops and reinforced a sense of collective purpose. One of the defining moments of the early campaigns came when a coalition of tribes launched a major assault across the Danube, overwhelming Roman outposts and forcing civilians to flee southward. The unexpected strength of the attackers required Marcus to reorganize forces quickly. He consulted with his generals through long nights of discussion, analyzing reports and considering options. Marcus did not react with panic or anger. He approached the situation with calm determination, focusing on practical steps to regain control. He strengthened the defensive perimeter, ordered reinforcements from nearby provinces, and coordinated a counteroffensive designed to reclaim lost ground. The counteroffensive unfolded gradually, marked by coordinated movements and strategic positioning. Roman legions advanced carefully, avoiding unnecessary risks, while targeting key locations that would disrupt the tribes' momentum. Marcus monitored progress closely, adjusting plans as new information emerged. His ability to maintain clarity under pressure allowed him to make decisions that balanced caution with necessary action. Soldiers responded positively to his leadership, drawing confidence from his composed presence and thoughtful guidance. As Roman forces regained control of critical positions, Marcus initiated diplomatic outreach to certain tribes. He understood that not all groups shared the same level of hostility or ambition. Some sought stability rather than conflict and were open to negotiations that offered mutual benefit. Marcus met with envoys, listened to their concerns, and offered fair terms when appropriate. He believed that unnecessary violence weakened both sides and that diplomacy could reinforce long-term peace. These negotiations, though often delicate, resulted in temporary agreements that eased pressure on certain regions. During this period, Marcus continued adapting to life on the frontier. He spent time visiting camps, speaking with soldiers, and observing their conditions. He valued understanding their experiences directly. When he saw difficulties, insufficient supplies, harsh weather, or emotional fatigue, he responded with practical solutions. He arranged additional rations, improved camp structures, and encouraged commanders to foster camaraderie among their units. These actions, though modest, strengthened the bond between Marcus and his soldiers. They saw in him a leader who cared deeply about their well-being and who shared their hardships. The immense strain of the plague continued to affect military operations. Soldiers fell ill, supply chains were disrupted, and medical teams were stretched to their limits. Marcus confronted these challenges with determination. He supported physicians, implemented measures to reduce the spread of illness, and ensured that reinforcements arrived when possible. He recognized that the war could not be fought effectively without addressing the underlying pressures created by disease. His holistic approach, balancing military, logistical, and health considerations, helped maintain the legion's overall stability. Despite the difficulties, progress continued steadily. Roman forces reclaimed outposts, routed hostile tribes, and reasserted control over significant stretches of the frontier. Each success reinforced Marcus's belief in patient, disciplined effort. He never sought victory through force alone. He used strategy, diplomacy, and resilience to guide the empire through the complexities of the conflict. His leadership reflected a deep understanding of both human nature and practical necessity. As the first phase of the Marcomannic Wars drew to a close, Marcus assessed the situation with measured realism. The frontier had stabilized, but long-term peace was far from guaranteed. The tribal alliances remained strong, and environmental pressures continued pushing groups toward Roman territory. Marcus understood that future campaigns would be necessary, yet he took comfort in the progress made, recognizing that the legions had regained confidence and cohesion under difficult circumstances. During quiet evenings in the camp, Marcus continued writing reflections that helped him process the emotional weight of the conflict. These writings were private, composed not for posterity but for clarity. They captured his thoughts on endurance, virtue, and the unpredictability of life. They offered him moments of stillness amid the demands of war, reinforcing his belief that inner strength was essential for effective leadership. In these reflections, Marcus found the balance needed to face each day with renewed purpose. By the end of this part, Marcus Aurelius had established a solid foundation for the campaigns ahead. He had restored stability to threatened regions, bolstered the legion's morale, and demonstrated leadership defined by patience, clarity, and commitment to the common good. The challenges were far from over, but Marcus remained steadfast. He understood that the path to lasting peace required endurance and wisdom, qualities he had cultivated throughout his life. As he prepared for the next stage of the conflict, Marcus carried with him the quiet determination that had always guided his approach to leadership. The Marcomannic Wars, once perceived as a distant or temporary disturbance, settled into the unmistakable shape of a prolonged conflict. As months turned into years, Marcus Aurelius realized that the frontier had become not just a battlefield, but a second home, an austere landscape where his leadership would be tested repeatedly and where the empire's future would be shaped one decision at a time. The Danubian provinces bore the weight of migration, unrest, and shifting alliances, forcing Rome to confront challenges unlike those faced in previous generations. Marcus accepted this reality with calm determination, knowing that the path forward required patience and an unwavering commitment to duty. The early advances of Roman forces had restored some stability to the region, yet the tribal coalitions remained resilient. Their leaders were strategic, resourceful, and motivated by pressures that extended beyond the conflict with Rome. Many tribes faced shortages of arable land, colder winters, and internal fractures that pushed communities southward. Marcus understood that Rome was not dealing with a singular adversary, but with a complex network of groups responding to broader forces. For him, this awareness created a necessity for clarity. It reminded him that military strength needed to be balanced with a nuanced understanding of the people Rome confronted. As the war deepened, Marcus reorganized administrative structures along the frontier. He appointed experienced governors, strengthened supply networks, and ensured that military communications remained consistent. The importance of logistics grew increasingly apparent. Supply wagons traveled long distances through forests, marshes, and river crossings, often passing through communities impacted by the plague. Marcus spent long hours reviewing the flow of grain, weaponry, equipment, and reinforcements. He recognized that a single disrupted route could compromise months of progress. His leadership reflected an understanding that battles were not won solely through combat, but through the quiet, meticulous work of maintaining stability behind the scenes. And the soldiers who served under Marcus had grown accustomed to his steady presence. They observed an emperor who lived simply, who walked through muddy camps without hesitation, and who shared their hardships without complaint. Marcus believed that a leader's example set the tone for the entire army. When food was scarce, he ate sparingly. When weather turned harsh, he endured it without seeking comfort. He did not present himself as above the soldiers, but as someone who stood beside them, facing the same challenges. This approach fostered a deep sense of loyalty. The legions trusted his judgment, not because of his title, but because of his sincerity. Despite their efforts, the Roman forces encountered significant setbacks. Certain tribal groups launched unexpected offensives, exploiting moments when Roman attention was divided. Skirmishes erupted in remote regions, sometimes overwhelming small outposts before reinforcements could arrive. Marcus approached these setbacks with calm deliberation. He did not assign blame or react impulsively. Instead, he gathered information, adjusted strategies, and emphasized learning from each event. His responsiveness reinforced the belief among his commanders that discipline and reflection, rather than emotion, guided his leadership. The environment itself added to the challenges. Harsh winters along the Danube tested the endurance of both soldiers and civilians. Snow covered supply routes, rivers froze unpredictably, and the cold limited mobility. Marcus spent many evenings studying maps, assessing weather conditions, and determining which routes could remain functional. He understood that imposing impossible demands on soldiers would weaken morale, so he adjusted expectations accordingly. These decisions demonstrated his sensitivity to human limits, reinforcing the sense that he valued the well-being of those who served under him. During quieter moments in the camp, Marcus continued his philosophical reflections. These writings captured the inner dialogue he used to steady himself amid uncertainty. He reminded himself to focus on what he could control, his actions, his intentions, and his judgment, while accepting the unpredictability of the world around him. His reflections emphasized virtues like patience, courage, and clarity. Though the diaries he kept were deeply personal, they became an essential part of how he maintained steadiness as the war stretched onward. Through these quiet exercises, Marcus found the mental resilience needed to endure the stresses of leadership. Diplomacy remained an important component of Marcus's strategy. He understood that not every tribal group sought conflict and that some leaders were open to negotiation. Marcus met with several envoys, listening to their grievances and proposing terms that could provide mutual benefit. He offered land agreements, trade opportunities, and support for tribes facing internal pressures. These diplomatic efforts did not always succeed, but when they did, they reduced immediate threats and freed Roman resources for more urgent regions. Marcus believed that a balanced approach, combining strength with fairness, was necessary to restore long-term stability. Tensions within the empire also demanded attention. The plague continued to circulate, affecting populations far from the frontier. Marcus corresponded regularly with provincial leaders, offering guidance, allocating assistance, and supporting efforts to maintain civic order. He understood that morale across the empire influenced the stability of Rome as much as military victories. His letters emphasized patience, compassion, and the need for communities to support one another during difficult times. Meanwhile, the Senate remained involved in discussions about the war's progress. Marcus ensured that senators were kept informed, sending detailed reports and maintaining open communication. He believed that transparency strengthened trust and that collaborative governance was essential, especially during prolonged conflict. His relationship with the Senate, built on decades of mutual respect, helped maintain political stability even as the empire faced mounting challenges. As the conflict entered a more intense phase, Marcus recognized the need for additional reinforcements. The scale of the tribal alliances required not only experienced legions, but also new recruits drawn from across the empire. He implemented recruitment initiatives that balanced necessity with fairness, encouraging capable men to join the legions while ensuring that essential industries in the provinces were not disrupted. These decisions contributed to a steady flow of soldiers, maintaining the strength needed for extended campaigns. By the end of this phase of the war, Marcus had navigated the complexities of frontier life with patience and adaptability. He faced a conflict shaped not by ambition, but by necessity, a conflict unfolding across rugged terrain, influenced by environmental pressures and complicated by the ongoing effects of the plague. Yet his leadership remained steady. He approached each challenge with reflection, discipline, and a commitment to the greater good. Though the war was far from over, Marcus had established the foundation for the next stage of campaigns, guided by the calm resilience that had shaped his life since youth. The next phase of the Marcomannic Wars brought with it some of the most difficult conditions Marcus Aurelius had yet encountered. The winter that settled over the frontier was harsher than expected, disrupting supply lines, slowing troop movements, and testing the endurance of the legions. Snow blanketed the camps, rivers froze in unpredictable patterns, and bitter winds swept across the landscape, making even the simplest tasks require immense effort. The soldiers, already fatigued from months of campaigning, now faced conditions that pushed their physical and emotional limits. Marcus observed these challenges with concern, knowing that leadership required not only strategic insight, but a deep understanding of human endurance. To sustain the army through the winter, Marcus worked closely with quartermasters and logistics officers. He implemented measures to preserve food supplies, established storage tents insulated against the cold, and coordinated shipments from nearby provinces. Grain, dried vegetables, salted meat, and medical supplies were transported through difficult terrain, often under threat of ambush or severe weather. Marcus recognized that supply failures could devastate morale, and he approached these challenges with practicality and foresight. His oversight ensured that even during the coldest months, soldiers received the sustenance needed to maintain their strength. The winter also created opportunities for reflection. With large-scale military movements limited by weather, Marcus used this period to evaluate strategies, review reports, and consult with generals. He gathered insights from officers who understood the terrain intimately, learning how each region responded to different environmental conditions. These discussions allowed Marcus to refine plans for the spring campaigns, ensuring that every movement aligned with the broader goals of stability and protection. His methodical approach demonstrated his belief that preparation was as essential as action. Despite efforts to maintain stability, illness remained a persistent concern. Soldiers living in close quarters faced renewed outbreaks of fever and respiratory conditions exacerbated by cold weather. Medical teams worked tirelessly, using herbs, salves, and traditional treatments to ease symptoms. Marcus visited infirmaries regularly, speaking with physicians and offering quiet encouragement to the sick. His presence brought comfort, reminding soldiers that their hardships were not ignored. Marcus believed deeply in the importance of compassion, especially during moments when physical vulnerability made emotional support even more meaningful. Amid the challenges of winter, diplomatic opportunities emerged. Certain tribal leaders, affected by the harsh season and internal pressures, sought negotiations with Rome. They sent envoys to discuss terms that might provide relief for their people in exchange for peace. Marcus approached these discussions with openness, recognizing that genuine dialogue could reduce conflict. He listened attentively to the concerns presented, requests for land, food, or protection from rival tribes. When agreements could be made without compromising Roman security, Marcus honored them. These treaties brought temporary stability to certain regions and demonstrated his belief that diplomacy, when used wisely, was a powerful tool. However, not all encounters followed this peaceful pattern. Some tribes viewed winter as an opportunity to launch surprise attacks against vulnerable Roman positions. These ambushes required quick responses, forcing Roman commanders to adapt their strategies. Marcus coordinated defensive measures, reinforcing outposts and deploying patrols capable of responding rapidly to threats. Though the Roman forces generally held their positions, the unpredictability of the attacks created constant tension. Marcus understood that the nature of the conflict demanded vigilance at all times, even during periods traditionally considered quiet. The emotional toll of the prolonged war became increasingly apparent. Soldiers missed their families, worried about the plague's impact on their hometowns, and faced daily uncertainty about survival. Marcus recognized these emotional strains and addressed them thoughtfully. He encouraged commanders to foster camaraderie, to ensure that soldiers supported one another, and to create routines that provided a sense of structure. He also offered frequent words of encouragement, reminding the legions of their purpose and acknowledging their sacrifices. Marcus understood that morale was as vital as physical strength. During long nights in the camp, Marcus continued writing reflections to steady his mind. He reminded himself of the nature of hardship, the importance of virtue, and the necessity of clarity during uncertain times. These writings did not eliminate his burdens, but they helped him maintain inner stability. He approached each day with renewed commitment, guided by a belief that leadership required consistent integrity, especially when circumstances grew heavy. As winter began to ease, Marcus initiated preparations for the next major phase of the campaign. He hosted strategic councils, gathering generals to discuss targets, supply routes, and timing. The Marcomanni and their allies remained strong, and Marcus anticipated renewed offensives once the weather improved. He emphasized the need for coordinated movements, disciplined formations, and careful planning. His approach reflected a deep understanding of both the strengths and vulnerabilities of his forces. The transition from winter to spring brought renewed activity. Rivers thawed, roads cleared, and the legions regained mobility. Marcus instructed his commanders to move cautiously, aware that the enemy would also be preparing for renewed conflict. As Roman forces advanced, they encountered both resistance and opportunities for negotiation. Some tribes sought peace, recognizing the challenges posed by continued conflict. Others regrouped, ready to defend their independence with determination. One of the most significant turning points of the campaign occurred during this period, when Roman forces engaged a coalition of tribes in a decisive battle near a fortified region along the Danube. The confrontation required careful coordination and strategic foresight. Marcus observed the preparations closely, ensuring that supply lines were secure, that troop formations were balanced, and that commanders understood the broader objectives. The battle unfolded over several days, marked by shifting lines, strong resistance, and moments of intense pressure. Yet Roman discipline prevailed. The legions held their formations, leveraged their training, and adapted to the changing dynamics on the field. The coalition eventually retreated, leaving behind a significant shift in momentum. Marcus did not celebrate this victory with excessive triumph. Instead, he viewed it as one step in a long and difficult journey. He focused on supporting the wounded, reorganizing units, and preparing for subsequent operations. He understood that even decisive moments offered only temporary relief. The broader conflict continued, influenced by forces beyond any single battle. His measured response reinforced the sense that leadership required humility, especially in times of success. By the end of this phase, Marcus had guided the empire through one of the harshest winters and emerged with renewed strength. The legions were unified, morale improved, and strategic positions regained. Yet the war was far from over. The challenges ahead remained complex, requiring endurance, adaptability, and clarity. Marcus approached the next stage with the same quiet determination that had defined his entire life, ready to face whatever the frontier would bring. By the time spring returned to the Danubian frontier, the Roman legions, under Marcus Aurelius, had regained a steady rhythm. The harsh winter had tested every layer of the army's endurance, yet it had also reinforced unity among the soldiers and sharpened the emperor's strategic focus. Marcus understood that the coming campaigns would require a different kind of effort, one that reached beyond defensive operations and into coordinated advances. The Marcomanni and allied tribes still held strong positions across the river, and their alliances continued shaping the landscape into one of shifting tensions and renewed threats. If lasting peace was to be restored, Rome needed to take decisive action. The crossing of the Danube marked the beginning of this new phase. The river, swollen with spring meltwater, represented both a physical barrier and a symbolic threshold. For years, it had defined the boundary between Roman control and the lands of independent tribes. Crossing it meant entering a territory that demanded constant vigilance, where terrain favored smaller, mobile groups, and where dense forests concealed potential ambushes. Marcus approached the crossing with careful preparation. He instructed engineers to construct fortified pontoons, ensured scouts surveyed the surrounding regions, and assigned veteran legions to lead the initial movements. This transition required discipline and patience. qualities Marcus had cultivated throughout his life. As Roman forces advanced into enemy territory, the terrain shifted dramatically. Thick forests stretched for miles, broken only by streams, hills, and narrow clearings. Paths were uneven, sometimes disappearing into heavy undergrowth. Marcus understood that such conditions demanded adaptability. He encouraged commanders to rely on local guides, utilize scouts extensively, and divide larger units into smaller, more flexible groups. This approach allowed Roman forces to respond swiftly to unexpected movements and to avoid the vulnerabilities presented by unfamiliar terrain. Not long after the crossing, the legions encountered resistance. Tribal warriors, skilled in navigating their homeland, launched ambushes from dense forests and retreated quickly after sharp engagements. These attacks tested Roman discipline, but Marcus maintained steady focus. He instructed commanders to avoid pursuit into uncertain terrain, emphasizing patience over impulsive action. Instead, he ordered the construction of temporary fortifications, allowing the legions to regroup, protect their supply lines, and establish secure positions. These measured responses prevented losses that might have resulted from overextension. The deeper Roman forces moved into tribal lands, the clearer the complexities became. The coalition of tribes opposing Rome was not uniform in structure or intent. Some groups were fiercely resistant, determined to defend their homes at any cost. Others sought negotiation, hoping to secure favorable terms or avoid the destruction of their communities. Marcus approached these dynamics with a balanced mindset. When envoys arrived seeking discussion, he listened carefully, assessing their sincerity and evaluating the potential benefits of peace. When tribes attacked without provocation, he responded with firm but controlled military action. His goal was not conquest, but stability, restoring a balance that allowed Rome to protect its borders while acknowledging the pressures facing neighboring peoples. Throughout these months, Marcus continued observing the emotional states of his soldiers. The demands of the campaign, long marches, uncertain terrain, and constant threat placed significant strain on morale. Marcus understood these pressures, addressing them through visible leadership and direct engagement. He visited encampments regularly, speaking with soldiers, listening to their experiences, and acknowledging their hardships. His presence, calm and centered, offered reassurance during times of uncertainty. Soldiers drew strength from the knowledge that their emperor shared their trials and valued their sacrifices. One of the most significant developments during this phase was the establishment of forward bases beyond the Danube. These bases served as strategic anchors, providing secure locations for storing supplies, coordinating troop movements, and launching further operations. Marcus oversaw the construction of these outposts with meticulous attention, ensuring that each was positioned effectively and protected by natural terrain when possible. These fortifications symbolized Rome's commitment to long-term stability and demonstrated Marcus's understanding that enduring peace required firm foundations. Despite the progress made, the campaign was far from straightforward. Heavy rains transformed roads into mud, slowing movements and complicating supply deliveries. Scattered attacks continued, forcing Roman commanders to respond constantly to unpredictable threats. Marcus met these challenges with characteristic steadiness. He reviewed reports regularly, adapted strategies when necessary, and maintained open communication with his generals. His approach reflected a belief in the importance of consistency, of meeting each obstacle with clear judgment rather than emotional urgency. Amid the military pressures, the plague still lingered across parts of the empire. Though less severe along the frontier than in previous years, isolated outbreaks occurred among veteran soldiers and local populations. Marcus continued supporting medical teams and emphasized preventative measures wherever possible. His attention to health, even in the midst of war, reflected a broader understanding that the strength of the empire depended on the well-being of its people. Throughout this period, Marcus's philosophical reflection deepened. Each night, after the camp settled into quiet, he revisited the principles that had shaped his life: acceptance of what he could not control, commitment to virtue, and recognition of the transient nature of hardship. He wrote brief reminders, tools for clarity during days filled with demands. These writings helped him maintain inner steadiness, ensuring that he met challenges not with frustration, but with thoughtful resolve. The turning point of this phase came when Roman forces engaged a large coalition of tribes in a contested region beyond the river. The battle unfolded across uneven terrain, requiring adaptability, discipline, and precise coordination. Marcus observed the preparations carefully, ensuring that commanders understood the broader objectives and that supply lines remained intact. The engagement lasted several days, marked by shifting lines and fierce resistance. Yet Roman discipline, supported by well-organized formations and strategic planning, ultimately prevailed. The tribes withdrew, and Rome secured one of its most significant victories of the campaign. Marcus responded to the victory with humility. He visited the wounded, ensured proper burial for fallen soldiers, and arranged negotiations with tribal leaders willing to consider peace. His measured response reflected a belief that success should be met with responsibility rather than celebration. For Marcus, victory was not an end, but a step toward restoring order. By the end of this part, Marcus had established a strong foothold beyond the Danube and made meaningful progress toward stabilizing the frontier. The campaign had been demanding, shaped by weather, terrain, shifting alliances, and the emotional toll of prolonged conflict. Yet, through patience and disciplined leadership, Marcus had guided the empire through another complex phase, one that demonstrated his resilience and his unwavering commitment to the common good. Following Rome's success against the Marcomanni, Marcus Aurelius recognized that the conflict was entering a new stage. The initial coalitions that had driven the early stages of the war began to fracture, but new alliances emerged among tribes farther east. The Sarmatians, experienced horsemen known for their mobility and powerful cavalry, became one of the most prominent threats on the frontier. Their movements disrupted supply lines, threatened newly established Roman positions, and challenged the stability Marcus had worked tirelessly to restore. The Sarmatians' tactics differed significantly from those of the earlier tribal groups. Their cavalry units, capable of rapid movement across open plains, often launched attacks with little warning, striking supply convoys or isolated outposts before retreating quickly. Marcus, aware of the danger posed by these tactics, adjusted Roman strategies accordingly. He emphasized the importance of scouting, rapid response units, and fortified camps. He instructed commanders to anticipate mobility rather than rely solely on traditional formations suited for infantry-based warfare. This adaptability became essential to navigating the evolving landscape. As tensions escalated, Marcus focused on reinforcing the frontier's infrastructure. Roads were repaired, bridges strengthened, and communication routes secured. He established additional way stations to store supplies and shelter soldiers during long marches. The combination of preparation and adaptability ensured that Roman forces could respond effectively to sudden shifts in the conflict. Marcus knew that logistical strength was the backbone of any long-term military engagement, and he approached these responsibilities with the same care he applied to matters of philosophy. Despite his deep involvement in military affairs, Marcus maintained his connection with the Senate and provincial leaders. He continued sending detailed reports, offering clarity about the challenges faced at the frontier and reassuring them of the empire's direction. His transparency helped maintain political stability at home, preventing misunderstandings and demonstrating respect for Rome's governing institutions. Marcus believed that the empire's well-being depended on unified leadership, and he worked diligently to preserve that unity. The Sarmatian threat intensified during the summer months, when their cavalry operated with greatest efficiency. Roman forces found themselves constantly repositioning, protecting supply lines, and responding to raids. Marcus moved between camps, coordinating operations and ensuring that communication remained clear. His calm presence steadied commanders and soldiers alike. Even in moments of uncertainty, Marcus displayed a composed confidence that reinforced morale. One significant challenge emerged when a large Sarmatian force launched an offensive that threatened a crucial Roman stronghold along the frontier. The attack was swift and coordinated, overwhelming smaller units and forcing Roman commanders to respond with urgency. Marcus immediately organized reinforcements, instructing multiple legions to converge on the threatened region. The march was difficult, long distances, summer heat, and complex terrain, but the soldiers pushed forward, motivated by their emperor's determination. When Roman forces arrived, a protracted battle ensued. The Sarmatians used their cavalry with devastating efficiency, attempting to break Roman formations through speed and impact. But the legions, trained in discipline and protected by coordinated shield walls, held firm. Marcus observed the battle with measured focus, guiding commanders and ensuring that reserves were deployed at crucial moments. After hours of intense fighting, the Sarmatian forces withdrew, unable to penetrate the Roman defenses. The stronghold remained secure, marking a significant success for the empire. Marcus approached the aftermath with the same sense of responsibility that defined all his leadership. He visited the injured, organized relief efforts, and oversaw repairs to the stronghold. He recognized that victories brought not only relief, but new responsibilities. Soldiers needed rest, supplies needed replenishing, and morale required steady reinforcement. Marcus ensured that each of these needs was addressed with care. The challenges of the frontier extended beyond military considerations. Refugees from affected regions sought safety within Roman lines. Marcus instructed his officers to provide shelter, food, and medical support. He believed that compassion strengthened the empire's moral foundation and reinforced trust among communities affected by the war. His inclusive approach fostered stability and demonstrated Rome's commitment to protecting those within its borders. During these months, Marcus also confronted personal pressures. Messages from Rome reported continued effects of the plague, concerns about economic strain, and administrative difficulties. Marcus addressed each issue with thoughtful correspondence, offering guidance and support. He understood that the empire's internal stability was deeply connected to its external security. His ability to balance these responsibilities reflected his lifelong practice of philosophical discipline. One of the most impactful developments during this time was Marcus's decision to form new military units from among the Sarmatians who surrendered. Recognizing their skill in cavalry warfare, he offered them land and integration into the empire in exchange for service. These units later became valuable assets, demonstrating Marcus's belief in practical solutions that went beyond simple victory or defeat. His willingness to adapt, to see potential even in former adversaries, reflected his commitment to long-term stability rather than short-term triumph. As the year progressed, the Roman forces gradually regained control over contested regions. The Sarmatian pressure eased, though not entirely, and Marcus continued strengthening the frontier's defenses. He remained aware that the conflict was far from resolved, but he also recognized the progress achieved through steady effort. Each successful operation, each restored stronghold, and each negotiated agreement contributed to a more secure and stable environment. Through it all, Marcus maintained his nightly practice of reflection. He wrote about the nature of leadership, the importance of resilience, and the need to remain anchored in virtue regardless of circumstance. These writings guided him through moments of fatigue and uncertainty, offering clarity when external pressures felt overwhelming. They reminded him that the path to peace was rarely straightforward, but always worth pursuing with patience and integrity. By the end of this part, Marcus stood at a moment of cautious stability. The frontier remained active, the Sarmatian threat not entirely subdued, but the empire was stronger than it had been at the start of the campaign. Marcus's leadership, steady, reflective, and grounded in principle, had carried Rome through another challenging chapter. As he prepared for the next phase, he understood that the journey ahead required the same qualities that had guided him since youth: clarity, endurance, and the quiet commitment to do what was right. As the campaigns along the frontier stabilized, Marcus Aurelius prepared for a temporary return to Rome. It had been years since he had last walked the marble streets of the capital, years since he had stood within the Senate or seen his family away from the tension of military encampments. The decision to return was not prompted by personal desire, but by necessity. The empire's heart faced challenges that required the emperor's presence: economic strain from prolonged warfare, lingering effects of the plague, provincial concerns, and administrative matters that demanded careful deliberation. Marcus understood that leadership could not remain confined to the frontier indefinitely. Rome needed its emperor as much as the legions did. The journey back was measured and unhurried. Marcus traveled with a small escort, reflecting quietly on the years spent in rugged landscapes far removed from the city's familiar structures. The contrast between the two worlds was profound. Along the Danube, the air had carried the scent of pine forests, soil damp with rain, and the smoke of soldiers' fires. In Rome, the air held traces of incense, stone, and the distant echo of bustling markets. Each environment shaped him differently, yet both reminded him of the interconnectedness of the empire he served. Upon arriving in the capital, Marcus was greeted not with extravagant celebration, but with a warm, dignified welcome organized by the Senate. Citizens gathered along the streets, offering respectful cheers. Their voices held a tone not of spectacle, but of relief that the emperor who shared in their hardships had returned. Marcus acknowledged the people with calm gestures, expressing gratitude without allowing the moment to become overtly ceremonial. He understood that the empire's mood was still fragile. Many families had lost loved ones to the plague or to the war, and excessive displays of wealth or celebration would feel misplaced. Marcus's return to Rome initiated a period of intense administrative attention. He met with senators to discuss financial pressures, grain distributions, taxation adjustments, and the condition of provinces affected by both illness and conflict. The war had strained the empire's resources, and Marcus approached these issues with his characteristic balance. He refused to impose harsh or reactionary measures. Instead, he studied detailed reports, consulted advisors, and made decisions that protected vulnerable communities while preserving the state's long-term stability. His leadership during this time displayed a commitment to fairness, even when circumstances made compromise difficult. One of the most significant concerns involved the empire's finances. Years of warfare and declining population had reduced revenue, disrupting the usual flow of resources to critical regions. Marcus initiated reforms that focused on efficiency rather than burden. He encouraged accountability among provincial officials, reduced unnecessary expenditures, and directed essential funds to infrastructure repairs and military logistics. His approach emphasized sustainability, recognizing that short-term solutions often created long-term instability. Marcus believed deeply in thoughtful stewardship, managing Rome's wealth with the same discipline he applied to his personal life. During his stay in Rome, Marcus also addressed legal matters that had accumulated in his absence. Petitioners from across the empire had traveled to the capital, seeking judgments on disputes, appeals, and unresolved cases. Marcus met them with patience, listening to their accounts and offering rulings grounded in fairness. These legal responsibilities, though often overshadowed by the drama of war, were essential to maintaining the trust of the people. Marcus understood that justice formed the moral foundation of the empire. His calm, methodical approach reassured citizens that their concerns were not lost amid the chaos of larger events. Beyond legal and economic matters, Marcus devoted time to the moral and cultural health of Rome. He met with philosophers, teachers, and scholars, discussing the importance of education during uncertain times. He believed that cultivating wisdom strengthened society by anchoring individuals in principles that transcended circumstance. Under his guidance, philosophical schools received support, public lectures continued, and writers were encouraged to preserve knowledge for future generations. Marcus saw intellectual growth as a stabilizing force, offering citizens a way to understand their experiences through reason and reflection. His time with family during this period provided moments of quiet reprieve. Marcus saw his children, who had grown noticeably since he last lived in Rome. Though responsible as a father, he remained consistent in his belief that love must be expressed through example rather than indulgence. He encouraged his children to pursue learning, understand responsibility, and develop inner discipline. His relationship with Faustina, his wife, also resumed its familiar rhythm, warm in its own measured way, shaped by shared hardship and mutual respect. These moments of domestic life reminded Marcus of the human dimensions of leadership, grounding him in a sense of personal continuity. Despite the relative peace within the city, news from the frontier reminded Marcus that the conflict had not ended. Reports described continued activity among various tribes, shifting alliances, and occasional raids along the Danube. The Sarmatians remained particularly active, probing for weaknesses and testing Roman defenses. Marcus read these reports with careful attention. He understood that his return to Rome was temporary and that leadership required presence wherever challenges emerged. Yet he also recognized that leaving Rome prematurely could destabilize the progress he had made in the capital. Balancing these obligations required clarity, patience, and a steady mind. During this time, Marcus also began considering long-term strategies for securing the frontier. The war had demonstrated that temporary victories, while important, could not ensure lasting peace. The pressures facing tribal groups, environmental change, internal conflict, and migration suggested that Rome needed solutions beyond military strength. Marcus studied proposals for settlement policies, integration agreements, and land allocations. He believed that offering stable arrangements to certain tribes could reduce hostility and create mutually beneficial relationships. His interest in these approaches reflected his broader commitment to reasoned, humane governance. Yet, amid his administrative responsibilities, Marcus did not neglect his personal practices of reflection. Each morning and evening, he revisited the principles that anchored his inner life. He reminded himself that leadership was not measured by praise, but by clarity of action. He considered the impermanence of hardship and the importance of maintaining virtue even during periods of strain. These reflections, though private, shaped the tone of every decision he made. They kept him grounded in the knowledge that the true measure of a leader was not the absence of difficulty, but the character displayed in responding to it. After several months in Rome, Marcus sensed that the time had come to return to the frontier. The empire needed his presence among the legions, where decisions affected thousands of soldiers and determined the balance of power along the Danube. He began preparing for his departure with the same calm deliberation that characterized all major transitions. He ensured that administrative structures in Rome were stable, that the Senate understood current priorities, and that his advisors had clear guidance. Marcus believed in empowering capable leaders to manage responsibilities in his absence, trusting them to uphold the principles he had reinforced. When Marcus left the capital once more, citizens watched with a sense of solemn gratitude. They knew he did not seek glory or comfort, but bore responsibilities, because he believed them necessary for the welfare of the empire. His departure reflected the ongoing commitment of a leader who remained anchored in duty, guided by principle and strengthened by years of disciplined thought. The road back to the frontier felt familiar, shaped by landscapes that had become part of Marcus's life. As he approached the military encampments once more, he transitioned seamlessly from the administrative world of Rome to the practical demands of the battlefield. The soldiers welcomed him with respect, reassured by the return of a leader who had stood beside them through thick and thin. Marcus acknowledged them calmly, ready to resume the tasks ahead. The campaigns that awaited him were complex, shaped by renewed tribal movements, unresolved tensions, and the enduring effects of earlier conflicts. Yet Marcus returned with a clear mind, strengthened by his time in Rome. He understood that leadership required flexibility, the ability to shift between worlds, respond to new realities, and remain grounded in virtue regardless of circumstance. By the end of this part, Marcus had once again embraced the dual responsibilities that defined his reign: protector of Rome's administrative order and commander of its frontier armies. The next stage of his journey would test him further, but he faced it with the same calm resolve that shaped every chapter of his life. Marcus Aurelius's return to the frontier marked the beginning of another intense period of military operations. Though the legions had made significant progress during his absence, the situation remained fluid. Various tribal groups continued moving along the Danube, adjusting alliances and testing Roman positions. The Sarmatians, in particular, displayed renewed activity, launching raids that threatened supply routes and outposts. Marcus understood that the stability gained during earlier campaigns could dissolve quickly without sustained effort. His return brought renewed discipline, strategic clarity, and a calm leadership presence that strengthened morale. Upon resuming command, Marcus met with his generals to assess the current state of the war. Reports confirmed that several tribal groups had taken advantage of the emperor's temporary absence to expand their influence. Though none had achieved major breakthroughs, their movement suggested the possibility of coordinated efforts. Marcus listened to each general carefully, asking precise questions and encouraging clear, honest assessments. His leadership style welcomed open discussion rather than rigid hierarchy, fostering a shared sense of responsibility. By the end of the council, he had a comprehensive understanding of the challenges ahead. One of Marcus's first priorities was securing key supply lines. The success of any long-term campaign depended on reliable access to food, equipment, and medical support. Marcus inspected storage facilities, reviewed transportation routes, and coordinated with provincial officials to ensure consistent deliveries. He understood that even the strongest legions faltered without proper supplies, and he approached logistical matters with the same seriousness he gave to battlefield strategy. His attention to detail ensured that soldiers remained equipped and prepared for the demands of the months ahead. The renewed campaigns reflected the changing dynamics of the conflict. Roman forces advanced strategically into regions identified as centers of tribal activity. The terrain varied dramatically: dense forests, open plains, steep hills, and marshlands that tested both soldiers and commanders. Marcus emphasized adaptability, instructing legions to adjust formations, tactics, and pacing based on regional conditions. This flexibility allowed Roman forces to maintain control over engagements and minimize unnecessary losses. Skirmishes occurred frequently. Some were small and brief, unfolding in narrow forest clearings or along riverbanks. Others expanded into prolonged engagements that required coordination among multiple units. Marcus approached each development with measured calm. He analyzed reports, provided guidance, and offered encouragement to commanders under pressure. His presence during critical moments reinforced confidence among the troops, who saw in him a leader fully committed to their shared mission. Amid the challenges, Marcus continued diplomatic efforts. Some tribal leaders, weary of prolonged conflict, reached out with proposals for negotiation. Marcus welcomed these discussions, believing that peaceful resolutions, when genuine, saved lives and resources. He met with envoys, listened to their concerns, and negotiated terms that emphasized fairness and stability. These agreements varied. Some offered land in exchange for loyalty. Others established boundaries meant to prevent future conflict. While not all negotiations succeeded, they played an essential role in reducing the scale of resistance. One of the more significant developments during this period involved the integration of newly surrendered tribes into the empire. Marcus saw an opportunity to strengthen Rome while offering stability to communities seeking peace. He granted land to certain groups under strict conditions, allowing them to settle in designated regions and contribute to Rome's defenses. These arrangements required careful oversight, but they helped create a buffer along the frontier and reduce the number of hostile groups seeking conflict. Marcus believed that long-term peace demanded pragmatic solutions that addressed underlying pressures rather than relying solely on force. Despite progress, the war continued to strain the empire's resources. The prolonged conflict, coupled with the lingering effects of the plague, created economic challenges that Marcus could not ignore. Letters from Rome described shortages, disrupted trade networks, and social tension in certain regions. Marcus addressed these concerns through correspondence, offering guidance and redirecting resources where possible. He understood that the empire's internal health was inseparably linked to its external strength. Maintaining stability at home remained one of his most important responsibilities. During the campaigns, Marcus faced personal challenges as well. Worry for his family remained constant, fueled by news of occasional outbreaks and the unpredictability of life in Rome. He remained committed to his duties, yet he carried these concerns quietly. His reflections during the night often centered on the nature of fate, the impermanence of human life, and the importance of meeting adversity with steady resolve. These moments of introspection strengthened him, allowing him to face each day with clarity and focus. As the months progressed, Roman forces achieved several important victories. Strongholds were reclaimed, enemy encampments dispersed, and supply routes stabilized. These successes reflected the steady, disciplined work of the legions and the thoughtful leadership provided by Marcus. Yet he did not allow progress to create complacency. He reminded his commanders that the frontier remained volatile and that peace required continued vigilance. His guidance ensured that operations remained organized, purposeful, and aligned with long-term strategic goals. One particularly notable event occurred when Roman scouts identified a gathering of multiple tribes preparing for a coordinated assault. Recognizing the potential threat, Marcus organized a preemptive strike designed to disrupt the alliance before it grew too strong. The operation required precise timing, stealth, and coordinated execution. Roman units moved silently through dense forests, approaching the enemy encampment from multiple directions. When the attack commenced, the tribes were caught off guard. After a brief but intense confrontation, the coalition scattered. The success of this preemptive action prevented a major offensive that could have prolonged the war significantly. Marcus approached the aftermath with humility. He focused on securing the region, supporting the injured, and preventing unnecessary destruction. His leadership emphasized stability over triumph, demonstrating a consistent commitment to the greater good rather than personal glory. His actions reinforced the sense among soldiers and allies that Rome's strength came from discipline, fairness, and purpose, not vengeance or domination. As the campaigning season drew to a close, Marcus reviewed the progress made. The frontier was stronger, tribal resistance weakened, and several diplomatic agreements offered glimpses of long-term peace. Yet he knew the conflict was not over. pressures along the Danube remained, influenced by factors beyond Rome's control. Marcus understood that the next stages of the war would require continued endurance. He prepared accordingly, organizing supplies, adjusting strategies, and reinforcing the values that had sustained the legions through years of hardship. By the end of this chapter, Marcus Aurelius stood at another moment of transition. He had returned to the frontier with renewed purpose, navigated challenges with calm clarity, and strengthened the empire through disciplined leadership. The trials ahead remained numerous, but Marcus faced them with the same patient resolve that had defined every chapter of his life and reign. The later years of the Marcomannic Wars unfolded with a weight that pressed upon every corner of Marcus Aurelius's life. The frontier had stabilized in certain regions, yet the overall conflict had not diminished in complexity. New tribal coalitions emerged, others dissolved and reformed, and environmental pressures continued pushing communities toward the Danube in search of resources. Marcus understood that the empire stood at a delicate threshold. The stability gained through earlier campaigns could easily fracture if vigilance faltered. As the war stretched onward, he remained committed to maintaining a steady hand, even as the demands placed upon him grew more intense. Rome itself also began to show signs of strain. The prolonged conflict had drained the treasury, disrupted trade routes, and required repeated recruitment efforts that weighed heavily on provincial populations. Grain shortages emerged in certain regions, and weakened harvests in others increased the empire's dependence on long-distance supply chains. Marcus approached these issues with characteristic patience. He reviewed reports, met with advisors, and implemented reforms designed to distribute resources more equitably. His decisions reflected a belief that leadership required fairness even when circumstances made generosity difficult. Amid these pressures, Marcus faced one of the most unexpected challenges of his reign, a revolt led by the general Avidius Cassius in the eastern provinces. Cassius, renowned for his military skill and success in earlier campaigns, declared himself emperor after receiving false reports that Marcus had died. The uprising spread quickly through parts of Syria and Egypt, threatening to divide the empire during a period of vulnerability. Marcus received the news with a calmness that surprised even those closest to him. He did not respond with anger or calls for vengeance. Instead, he paused, studied the situation carefully, and assessed the potential consequences. His first concern was the unity of the empire. Civil conflict, even brief, could weaken Rome's ability to defend itself along the frontier. Marcus understood that every decision needed to be guided by restraint. He sent messages to provincial governors urging caution, stability, and a commitment to peaceful resolution whenever possible. He avoided framing the revolt as a personal affront, choosing instead to view it as a misunderstanding amplified by fear and miscommunication. Marcus's perspective reflected his lifelong belief in rational judgment and his refusal to allow emotion to dictate action. Meanwhile, Cassius's support began to waver. Many of his officers doubted the legitimacy of the revolt once it became clear that Marcus was alive. Attempts to consolidate power faltered, and within a short time Cassius was assassinated by his own followers. When the news reached Marcus, he responded not with satisfaction, but with sorrow. He had hoped to offer clemency. Marcus believed deeply in forgiveness and regretted that Cassius' life had ended without the opportunity for reconciliation. His reaction revealed a profound sense of humanity, one that extended even to those who had opposed him. Despite the resolution of the uprising, Marcus recognized that the East required his attention. He traveled with Faustina, intending to meet provincial leaders, restore stability, and address concerns left in the wake of the revolt. The journey was long, marked by shifting landscapes and varying climates. Marcus used the time to reflect on the fragility of human judgment and the unpredictability of fate. His writings from this period displayed a deep awareness of how easily fear could escalate into conflict and how critical it was for leaders to meet fear with clarity rather than resentment. Tragically, during this journey, Faustina fell ill. The illness progressed rapidly, and despite medical efforts, she passed away. The loss struck Marcus with profound sadness. Faustina had shared his burdens, raised their children, and supported him through years of war. Marcus grieved quietly, holding to the Stoic principles that had guided him since youth. He reminded himself that death was a natural part of life, something that touched every family regardless of status. Yet acceptance did not erase the ache of absence. Marcus's sorrow, though carried with dignity, deepened the emotional weight he bore during a period filled with hardship. After completing his responsibilities in the East, Marcus returned to the frontier. The legions welcomed him with respect tempered by concern. They knew he had suffered personal loss, and they understood the pressures he faced. Marcus acknowledged their empathy with gratitude, but he quickly redirected his focus to the tasks ahead. His leadership remained steady, strengthened by the resilience he cultivated through reflection and discipline. The frontier situation, though somewhat improved, remained volatile. The Marcomanni and other tribes were regrouping, influenced by internal shifts, environmental challenges, and the lingering impacts of war. Marcus resumed strategic planning immediately. He organized new operations, reinforced key positions, and adjusted troop deployments based on updated intelligence. His approach remained grounded in patience and clarity. He understood that rushing into action could create more problems than it solved. The long war had taught him that endurance, not speed, shaped lasting outcomes. As campaigns resumed, the legions encountered increasing resistance. Some tribal groups, driven by desperation, launched bold attacks designed to disrupt Roman momentum. These engagements tested the discipline of the soldiers and the resilience of Roman defenses. Marcus supported his commanders with precise guidance, reminding them to act with both strength and restraint. He viewed each battle not as an opportunity for destruction, but as a necessary step toward restoring balance along the frontier. During this period, Marcus also focused on strengthening alliances with tribes willing to negotiate. He offered fair terms, emphasizing the benefits of peaceful coexistence. These diplomatic efforts required patience and careful judgment, as tribal leaders often balanced multiple pressures within their own communities. Marcus recognized that true stability came from understanding these pressures and addressing them with empathy rather than dominance. His ability to see beyond immediate conflict distinguished his leadership, shaping relationships that supported long-term peace. Despite his efforts, the war continued to produce moments of shock and difficulty. One such moment occurred when a group of tribes attempted an unexpected crossing of the Danube, overwhelming a Roman garrison before reinforcements could arrive. Marcus responded calmly, coordinating a targeted counterattack that regained control of the region. His steadiness in the face of adversity reinforced the trust of both soldiers and officers. They saw in him a leader whose composure did not falter when confronted with sudden setbacks. As months turned into years, Marcus's reflections deepened further. He wrote often about the nature of duty, the unpredictability of life, and the importance of maintaining integrity under strain. His writings revealed a combination of vulnerability and strength, acknowledging the emotional burdens he carried while reaffirming his commitment to the greater good. These private reflections provided a counterbalance to the demands of public life, offering clarity when circumstances seemed overwhelming. By the end of this part, the empire stood at a crossroads. The war had taken a tremendous toll, yet progress had been made. Threats persisted, but stability had been regained in several regions. Marcus Aurelius, carrying both personal grief and public responsibility, remained committed to leading with patience, wisdom, and a deep sense of moral responsibility. The next stage of the conflict would test the empire further, but Marcus approached it with the same disciplined clarity that had defined his reign. The next major phase of the Marcomannic Wars brought one of the most memorable and dramatic events of Marcus Aurelius's reign, a confrontation that tested the endurance of the legions, the ingenuity of their commanders, and Marcus's unwavering commitment to the soldiers under his care. As Roman forces advanced into tribal territories, a coalition of warriors managed to trap a significant Roman detachment within a valley region, cutting off access to water and limiting the possibility of resupply. The siege threatened to overwhelm the troops, who faced exhaustion, dehydration, and the psychological strain of encirclement. Marcus responded immediately. He moved quickly with reinforcements, determined to relieve the besieged soldiers before the situation became irreparable. His urgency was not driven by panic, but by a profound sense of responsibility. Marcus believed that leadership required presence during moments of extreme danger. He understood that soldiers drew strength not only from strategic decisions, but from knowing their emperor valued their lives and stood beside them in moments of crisis. The march to the besieged position was arduous, marked by rugged terrain and shifting defensive lines established by tribal forces. As Roman units approached the region, they engaged in a series of skirmishes designed to break through enemy barriers. Marcus coordinated these movements with precision, using flanking strategies to disperse tribal formations and open a path toward the trapped detachment. His calm oversight ensured that each maneuver supported the larger objective rather than escalating into uncontrolled combat. Inside the valley, the trapped Roman soldiers endured conditions that pushed them to their limits. With water supplies running dangerously low, many suffered from dehydration. Heat intensified the hardship, making even brief moments of shade precious. Despite these conditions, the soldiers maintained discipline, holding their positions and defending against enemy assaults. Their endurance became a testament to the training and cohesion Marcus had cultivated throughout the war. What happened next would later become a subject of fascination among historians and storytellers. Accounts from the period describe a sudden, unexpected storm that brought rain into the valley at the most critical moment. The downpour allowed the soldiers to collect water, regain strength, and continue holding their positions until reinforcements arrived. Though later interpretations varied, some attributing the event to religious intervention, others to sudden meteorological change, Marcus approached it with characteristic pragmatism. He acknowledged the soldiers' gratitude for the relief, but focused his attention on the strategic advantage the storm provided. For Marcus, the event was not a miracle to be celebrated, but a reminder of nature's unpredictability and the resilience of those who served under him. With renewed strength, the besieged detachment held firm, long enough for Marcus's reinforcements to break through the valley's perimeter. The combined forces pushed the tribal coalition back, relieving the siege and restoring control over the region. Marcus visited the soldiers personally, offering quiet recognition of their endurance and ensuring that medical teams addressed their needs. His presence reinforced the bond between emperor and army, one built not on displays of authority but on lived solidarity during hardship. Following the relief of the siege, Marcus evaluated the broader implications of the confrontation. He recognized that the coordination among tribal groups indicated an evolving strategy designed to exploit vulnerabilities in Roman movements. In response, he revised operational plans, emphasizing flexibility, enhanced scouting, and improved communication among units. Marcus understood that adaptive leadership was essential for navigating a conflict shaped by shifting alliances and unpredictable environmental conditions. As the campaigns continued, Marcus traveled frequently between encampments, maintaining a steady rhythm of oversight. He reviewed defensive positions, inspected supply lines, and met with commanders to discuss strategic opportunities. His leadership style, measured, consistent, and intensely engaged, helped maintain cohesion among the legions. Soldiers who saw him riding through camp felt strengthened by his presence, understanding that their emperor shared the burdens of war with them. Despite the ongoing conflict, Marcus did not lose sight of the importance of diplomacy. Several tribes, recognizing the shifting balance of power, approached Roman lines seeking negotiation. Marcus welcomed these discussions. He believed that peace achieved through understanding was more durable than peace forced solely through violence. He listened to each envoy with patience, negotiating agreements that addressed mutual concerns. These negotiations often resulted in temporary truces, provision of land, or agreements for tribal service within the Roman military. Such arrangements eased pressure on the frontier and fostered stability in regions where military solutions alone could not solve deeper problems. However, the war's emotional toll continued to grow. Marcus carried the weight of prolonged conflict, personal loss, and the demands of leadership with a dignified calmness. His reflections during this period reveal a deepening awareness of human vulnerability. He wrote about the necessity of compassion, the fleeting nature of life, and the importance of meeting adversity with virtue rather than bitterness. These writings, created in quiet moments between campaigns, helped sustain him as the war pressed onward. The pressure on Rome itself remained significant. Prolonged military spending strained the treasury, requiring adjustments in taxation and resource allocation. Marcus addressed these challenges with fairness, avoiding measures that would disproportionately burden the poor. He encouraged governors to minimize corruption, maintain accurate records, and support communities most affected by economic hardship. His focus on justice reinforced the stability of the empire, even during times of scarcity. One of the most remarkable aspects of Marcus's leadership during this period was his ability to maintain clarity amid overlapping crises. He faced threats on the frontier, economic strain at home, political unrest, and personal grief. Yet he approached each challenge with a methodical calmness. He believed that the only true measure of leadership was the ability to act wisely under pressure. His decisions reflected this belief, consistently prioritizing the welfare of the empire over personal comfort. By the end of this part, the war had entered its most decisive phase. Marcus Aurelius had strengthened the frontier, reinforced the legions, and guided Rome through internal upheaval. His leadership remained anchored in patience, humility, and moral discipline. The challenges ahead would require continued endurance, but Marcus faced them with the same steady resolve that defined every chapter of his life. Chapter 10. The later phase of the Marcomannic Wars unfolded with a sense of deliberate urgency. Marcus Aurelius, having guided the empire through years of conflict, understood that the time had come to secure a lasting peace along the northern frontier. The recent victories, diplomatic gains, and regained stability had created a moment of opportunity, one that needed to be shaped carefully. A permanent solution, rather than temporary relief, was now Marcus's goal. Such a solution required not only military strength but also thoughtful negotiation, careful administration, and a deep understanding of the conditions that fueled tribal unrest. By this point, the empire had weathered countless challenges. Waves of invasions, shifting tribal alliances, shortages, disease, internal uprisings, and the emotional burdens carried by both leaders and soldiers. Marcus faced these realities with steady patience, never allowing the scale of hardship to overshadow his sense of responsibility. The emperor believed that the ultimate purpose of leadership was to restore order in a way that allowed future generations to live with stability, regardless of the difficulties endured in the present. With this philosophy in mind, Marcus organized a series of strategic operations designed to consolidate Roman control over key territories. The legions advanced carefully, securing strongholds and establishing outposts that anchored the frontier. Each operation was planned with meticulous attention to the terrain, supply lines, and tribal activity in the surrounding regions. Marcus encouraged commanders to move with restraint, avoiding unnecessary destruction, while ensuring that hostile groups understood Rome's resolve. His approach reflected a balance between strength and measured discipline, a tone that shaped the character of the entire campaign. During these months, Marcus spent significant time meeting with tribal envoys. Some came seeking protection from rival groups, others requested land or autonomy in exchange for peace. Marcus listened to each with patient attentiveness. He recognized that the tribes did not act from simple hostility, but from pressures created by climate, migration, scarcity, and internal disputes. He believed that peace could only be sustained if these deeper tensions were addressed through structured agreements. Thus, he negotiated settlements that allowed certain tribes to live within the empire's borders under specific conditions: service to Rome, adherence to its laws, and contributions to frontier defense. These arrangements required trust and oversight, but they laid the groundwork for a more stable northern frontier. The legions, though experienced and resolute, were beginning to show signs of fatigue. Years of campaigning had worn them down physically and emotionally. Many soldiers longed to return home, to families they had not seen in years. Marcus understood this longing, feeling it himself in the quiet hours of night when the camp descended into stillness. Yet he also knew that the war's final stage required discipline and unity. He met with his soldiers regularly, offering encouragement and acknowledging their sacrifices. His presence reminded them that they were not fighting alone, but with an emperor who shared their hardships and valued their endurance. The strategic landscape remained complex. Certain tribal groups remained hostile, unwilling to accept Roman terms. Others resisted peacefully, but refused to engage in negotiations. Marcus navigated these dynamics with careful judgment. When force was necessary, he used it skillfully and proportionally. When diplomacy offered a better path, he pursued it with sincerity. His consistency in these principles strengthened the respect he held among both Romans and some tribal leaders. One of the major challenges during this period involved securing the newly reclaimed territories. Many had been devastated by conflict, fields burned, structures destroyed, populations displaced. Marcus prioritized rebuilding efforts, believing that stability required physical and economic renewal. He allocated resources for reconstruction, supported local leaders in rebuilding communities, and ensured that essential supplies were distributed efficiently. These efforts reflected his belief that peace should be reinforced not only by military strength, but by improving the lives of those affected by war. In addition to provincial reconstruction, Marcus faced ongoing administrative demands from Rome. The Senate required updates on the war's progress, financial matters needed oversight, and new legislation demanded attention. Despite the distance, Marcus maintained steady communication with the capital. He read each dispatch carefully, offering guidance on matters ranging from judicial appeals to provincial governance. His ability to balance frontier leadership with administrative responsibility demonstrated the depth of his discipline. During one particularly reflective period, Marcus considered the possibility of creating two new provinces north of the Danube, Marcomannia and Sarmatia. These provinces, if established, would secure the frontier and reduce the likelihood of future invasions. The idea carried both promise and risk. It required substantial resources, long-term military presence, and careful negotiation with local populations. Marcus deliberated thoughtfully, consulting generals, governors, and trusted advisors. His vision reflected a desire to create lasting stability, but he recognized that success depended on both the empire's strength and the willingness of local groups to accept such an arrangement. Throughout this time, Marcus continued to lean on his philosophical practices. Each day brought new challenges, unexpected movements along the frontier, reports of shortages, disputes among allied tribes, and the lingering effects of the plague. Through it all, Marcus reflected on the nature of endurance, the necessity of meeting hardship with clarity, and the importance of acting in accordance with virtue. His writings from this period reveal a combination of fatigue and resolve, demonstrating how philosophy supported the practical realities of leadership. As the campaign season advanced, Roman forces achieved several meaningful victories. An important stronghold was captured from a coalition of resistant tribes, opening a route that allowed deeper penetration into contested regions. The legions used this momentum to establish additional fortified positions, further strengthening the frontier. Marcus celebrated these successes modestly. He knew that victories in war were not ends in themselves, but steps toward a greater purpose, creating a stable and secure border that would protect the empire for decades to come. Toward the end of this phase, Marcus began planning the final operations needed to complete the campaign. He believed that the war, after so many years, was nearing a conclusion. His strategic assessments indicated that the remaining hostile groups were weakened, and diplomatic progress with certain tribes suggested that long-term agreements were within reach. Marcus approached these developments with cautious optimism. He never allowed confidence to become complacency, understanding that the frontier's shifting dynamics required constant attention. By the end of this part, Marcus had guided the Marcomannic Wars into a decisive moment. The empire had regained strength, the legions remained unified, and the frontier had become more stable than at any point in the conflict. The stage was set for the final chapters of the war, chapters that would test Marcus deeply, not only as a leader, but as a man carrying the cumulative weight of years of responsibility. As the Marcomannic Wars approached their final phase, Marcus Aurelius found himself confronting a mixture of hope and exhaustion. The successes of recent years had positioned Rome favorably, yet Marcus knew that peace was rarely secured through a single decisive moment. Instead, it emerged gradually, shaped by persistence, negotiation, and the careful balancing of strength and restraint. The emperor approached this final push with the same clarity that had guided him through every stage of the conflict, but the years of strain were beginning to manifest in quieter, more personal ways. The legions, though loyal and disciplined, carried the fatigue of long service. Marcus recognized their weariness, not as weakness, but as a testament to their endurance. He met with his commanders to ensure rotations were established, allowing units rest whenever possible. He emphasized the importance of maintaining morale, encouraging leaders to foster camaraderie and stability within their ranks. Soldiers who felt seen and valued, Marcus believed, were better equipped to face the final demands of the campaign. Strategically, Marcus focused on securing remaining pockets of resistance. A small but determined coalition of tribes continued operating along the frontier, launching raids and resisting diplomatic overtures. Marcus coordinated targeted operations to dismantle these groups' ability to disrupt the region. He instructed generals to use caution, avoiding unnecessary risk while maintaining steady pressure. Gradually, the coalition weakened, losing both territory and influence. Each successful engagement brought Rome closer to the peace Marcus envisioned. Yet the emperor knew that victory could not be measured solely by battlefield accomplishments. Long-term peace required rebuilding trust, shaping agreements that addressed the needs of diverse communities, and ensuring that the empire's northern border became more than a temporary line of defense. With this in mind, Marcus revisited his earlier considerations regarding the creation of new provinces, Marcomannia and Sarmatia. The plan remained ambitious, requiring significant investment and diplomatic coordination. Marcus evaluated the steps necessary to implement the idea, weighing the benefits of lasting stability against the resources required to achieve it. During this period, the political landscape in Rome grew increasingly complex. Economic strain persisted, and factions within the Senate debated the best path forward. Some supported Marcus's vision for expanded provinces, believing it would secure the frontier permanently. Others feared the costs and long-term commitments involved. Marcus listened to these debates respectfully, valuing the perspectives offered. Yet he remained guided by a steady sense of duty. Decisions must serve the empire's future, not simply appease present concerns. Away from the battlefield and political discussions, Marcus faced the weight of personal reflection. Years of leadership had required constant discipline, emotional restraint, and clarity of judgment. These habits became second nature, yet they also demanded continuous effort. At night, when the camp grew silent, Marcus often wrote in his private journal. These reflections reveal the quiet fatigue of a man who understood the cost of leadership, but accepted it willingly. He wrote about the impermanence of life, the necessity of meeting each moment with virtue, and the importance of acting with integrity even when the path ahead remained uncertain. Meanwhile, harsh weather, disease, and logistical challenges continued to shape the day-to-day experiences of both soldiers and civilians along the frontier. Marcus approached these difficulties with the same pragmatic attention he gave strategic matters. He ensured medical teams were supported, supply routes protected, and communication channels strengthened. His understanding of leadership extended beyond battlefield decisions to include the quiet, persistent work that sustained morale and ensured long-term stability. A significant turning point came when Roman forces secured a comprehensive victory over a major tribal group that had persisted in resisting negotiations. The victory, achieved through coordinated operations and precise timing, marked the effective end of large-scale opposition along the frontier. Tribes that had once resisted now approached Roman envoys with increased openness to dialogue. Marcus met these developments with a calm sense of progress. He finalized several peace agreements that established clear boundaries, mutual obligations, and opportunities for integration. These agreements reinforced the stability of the region and allowed Marcus to shift his focus toward reconstruction and consolidation. Despite these achievements, Marcus remained cautious. He understood that peace was not a final destination, but an ongoing process requiring continuous attention. He instructed provincial governors to maintain vigilance, ensure that terms of agreements were honored, and support communities adjusting to new arrangements. His guidance reflected a long-term perspective, one that recognized the interconnectedness of military, diplomatic, and administrative efforts. During one of his final reviews of the frontier, Marcus visited several settlements, both Roman and tribal. He observed families rebuilding homes, soldiers repairing fortifications, and traders reestablishing routes disrupted by years of conflict. These scenes reinforced his belief that stability began with small, consistent acts of renewal. Marcus encouraged local leaders, offering words of support and reminding them of the collective effort required to maintain peace. As preparations for Marcus's eventual return to Rome began, a quiet sense of culmination settled over the frontier. The emperor had spent much of his reign guiding the empire through challenges that tested its resilience. The Marcomannic Wars, among the most demanding conflicts of the era, had shaped Marcus into a leader whose patience and moral clarity earned enduring respect. He had navigated personal loss, political pressure, military hardship, and social upheaval, all while maintaining a commitment to the values that defined his life. By the end of this chapter, Marcus Aurelius stood at the threshold of the conflict's resolution. The frontier was more stable, the legions unified, and diplomatic agreements promising long-term peace were in place. The emperor's work, though not yet complete, had guided the empire through one of its most turbulent periods. With calm endurance and unwavering discipline, Marcus prepared for the responsibilities that awaited him in the next and final stages of his journey. As the Marcomannic Wars neared their end, Marcus Aurelius stood at a moment of rare equilibrium. The frontier had stabilized after years of relentless strain. The legions, though tired, were unified and confident. Diplomacy had created pathways for long-term peace, and Rome's borders were more secure than they had been in a generation. For the first time in many years, Marcus allowed himself to sense the closeness of conclusion, a quiet, cautious hope that the empire might soon return to a period of calm stability. Yet, even in this fleeting balance, Marcus understood that leadership did not allow for rest. The responsibilities that shaped his life continued to demand attention, and the final burden of his reign pressed upon him with a weight both familiar and newly heavy. The empire remained vast, filled with countless needs, tensions, and uncertainties. Marcus approached these final tasks with the same disciplined patience that had defined him since youth. He began by reassessing the frontier's long-term security. The newly formed agreements with tribal groups held promise, but they required vigilant oversight. Marcus instructed provincial governors to maintain fairness, avoid exploitation, and ensure that the tribes integrated into the empire's systems received the support and guidance necessary for stability. He believed that trust, once established, must be nurtured through consistent action. The treaties were not simply political documents. They were foundations upon which future peace might be built. Next, Marcus turned his attention to strengthening administrative structures across the empire. The prolonged war had strained provincial resources, created financial imbalances, and tested the capacity of local institutions. Marcus implemented reforms to stabilize economic systems, improve tax fairness, and restore infrastructure in regions affected by conflict. He reviewed proposals for public works, supported rebuilding efforts, and encouraged trade routes to reopen. His goal was clear: restore the empire's vitality as quickly and fairly as possible. At the same time, Marcus worked to reinforce unity within the Senate. Discussions about succession, provincial management, and military expenditures had created divisions among certain factions. Marcus approached these disagreements with patience and clarity. He reminded senators of their shared responsibility to the empire and encouraged collaboration over rivalry. His presence carried a sense of moral authority, one earned through decades of consistent integrity. Even those who disagreed with his policies respected his sincerity and his unwavering commitment to the common good. One of the most delicate responsibilities Marcus carried during this period was guiding the future of imperial leadership, particularly as it concerned his son Commodus. Marcus's hopes for the succession had long been shaped by his belief in stability. Though he understood that Commodus lacked the philosophical depth and disciplined nature he valued, Marcus approached the matter with practicality. The empire needed a clear line of succession to avoid civil conflict, and Marcus believed that preparing Commodus carefully offered the best chance for continuity. He spent significant time with his son, discussing governance, responsibility, and the values expected of a leader. Marcus did not impose philosophy upon him, but encouraged reflection, fairness, and restraint. He arranged for experienced advisors to guide Commodus and prepared him gradually for increased responsibilities. Marcus recognized his son's limitations, yet he treated him with patience, understanding that character was shaped by example as much as by instruction. Amid these responsibilities, Marcus also continued his nightly reflections, moments that offered clarity and steadiness as his body grew increasingly fatigued. The years of war, travel, and emotional strain had taken a toll. He felt the heaviness in his limbs, the quiet ache in his chest, and the slow recovery from even minor illnesses. Yet he did not allow these signs of aging to limit his dedication. Instead, he adapted his routines, conserving energy where necessary while continuing to guide the empire with steady focus. During quiet evenings, Marcus wrote about the nature of duty, and the inevitability of mortality. He recognized that his time was nearing its end, though he rarely spoke of it aloud. His reflections reveal a serene acceptance, an understanding that every life, regardless of its length or accomplishments, followed the same natural course. What mattered, Marcus believed, was the quality of one's actions and the virtue with which one faced each moment. As part of his final responsibilities, Marcus continued strengthening diplomatic channels with neighboring peoples. He understood that lasting peace depended on relationships built on fairness rather than force. He met with tribal leaders, reaffirmed treaty terms, and discussed opportunities for cooperation. These meetings, though understated, shaped the region's long-term stability and reflected Marcus's belief that the empire's strength was best sustained through reasoned partnership. One notable event during this period involved an unexpected dispute between two allied tribes. Their conflict threatened to unravel agreements that had taken years to establish. Marcus acted quickly, sending envoys to mediate and inviting representatives from both tribes to discuss their concerns. Through patient dialogue, the dispute was resolved peacefully, reinforcing Marcus's reputation as a leader who valued understanding over domination. His ability to maintain harmony among diverse groups demonstrated the depth of his diplomatic skill. As Marcus approached what he sensed were the final months of his life, he began organizing his personal affairs with quiet deliberation. He reviewed correspondence, recorded reflections, and ensured that those close to him understood the responsibilities that would outlast him. His tone remained calm, not fearful, not desperate, but steady and contemplative. He wrote openly about the transient nature of his own role, reminding himself that emperors, like all people, were temporary caretakers of a world that existed long before them and would continue long after. Toward the end of this phase, Marcus returned once more to the frontier, not out of necessity, but out of commitment. He wanted to see the final arrangements of peace completed, to reassure the legions, and to ensure that his presence strengthened unity one last time. Despite growing weakness, he traveled north with composed determination, understanding that this final journey would mark the closing chapter of his life's work. By the end of this part, Marcus Aurelius stood as a leader who had fulfilled his responsibilities with remarkable depth of character. The empire, though scarred by years of conflict, had regained stability. The frontier was secured, diplomacy strengthened, and administrative order restored. Marcus felt the quiet approach of mortality, yet he carried it with dignity, grounded in a lifetime of reflection and disciplined virtue. Marcus Aurelius's final days unfolded with the same quiet clarity that had characterized his entire life. As he traveled north to complete the last responsibilities of the Marcomannic settlement, he carried with him a deep awareness of his declining health. Fatigue settled into his bones more heavily than before. Simple tasks required greater effort, yet Marcus did not retreat from duty. Instead, he continued to work calmly, steadily, and without complaint, ensuring that every detail of the frontier's final stabilization was handled with care. Upon reaching the military camp near Vindobona, Marcus was greeted with the respectful solemnity of soldiers who sensed the significance of the moment. The legions understood that their emperor, aged and worn from years of service, had come not out of necessity but out of devotion. Marcus met with his commanders, listened to their reports, and offered guidance. Though his voice was soft and his movements slower, his mind remained sharp. Every decision he made reflected the same balance and foresight that had long defined his leadership. As the days passed, Marcus's illness worsened. Fever settled in, accompanied by growing weakness. Physicians attempted treatments, herbal infusions, heated compresses, and rest, but nothing reversed the progression. Marcus accepted their efforts with gratitude, but without illusion. He understood that his life was nearing its natural end. The soldiers sensed this too. They maintained their duties with disciplined composure, but the atmosphere within the camp grew noticeably subdued. Marcus spent his remaining strength organizing the final matters of succession. He met with Commodus, offering guidance that extended beyond administrative details. He reminded his son of the responsibilities that awaited him, the importance of restraint, justice, and clarity. Marcus spoke not as a distant emperor, but as a father who understood the fragility of power and the weight of leadership. He encouraged Commodus to act with patience, to listen to advisors, and to remember that an emperor's actions reverberated through every layer of society. Although Marcus hoped his advice would guide his son, he also recognized that every individual followed their own path. He had done what he could. The rest would unfold as fate allowed. During his final evenings, Marcus continued his reflective practice, even as his strength waned. He asked attendants to read aloud passages from philosophy, teachings on impermanence, duty, and the nature of the human soul. These words brought him comfort, reinforcing principles he had embraced throughout his life. He spoke quietly about the cycles of nature, the inevitability of change, and the acceptance of death as part of the universal order. One account from those present describes Marcus asking to be moved from his bed to a simple cot, preferring a humble place to spend his final moments. The gesture reflected his consistent rejection of excess and his belief in living and dying in accordance with nature. He told attendants not to grieve but to continue their duties, emphasizing that sorrow should not eclipse responsibility. Even in his final hours, he answered to the discipline he had practiced since youth. Marcus Aurelius passed away quietly, likely in early March of 180 CE, surrounded by a small circle of attendants and officers. His death carried a profound stillness, an ending marked not by spectacle, but by dignity. Word spread through the camp, and a solemn silence took hold. Soldiers stood in formation, honoring the emperor who had shared their hardships, marched beside them, and guided them through one of the most challenging eras in Rome's history. When news reached Rome, the Senate and citizens mourned deeply. They understood the magnitude of the loss. Marcus had been more than an emperor. He had been a model of leadership shaped by wisdom, patience, and unwavering commitment to the common good. His reign had guided the empire through plague, war, economic strain, and social upheaval, and he had done so with a steadiness rare among those who held great power. In the months that followed, Marcus's legacy began to take form. His writings, meditations penned during nights of reflection in distant camps, circulated quietly among scholars. They were not intended for public view, yet they offered a rare insight into the mind of a ruler who sought virtue above ambition. These reflections revealed a man who grappled with human weakness, yet aspired always toward clarity and goodness. His death marked the end of the Pax Antonina, a period of relative stability shaped by the Nerva Antonine emperors. Though the empire would face new challenges under Commodus, Marcus's influence endured. His example continued to inspire scholars, leaders, and citizens for centuries, shaping the philosophical traditions of both East and West. In the quiet that followed his passing, those who had known him remembered not only the emperor behind campaigns and decrees, but the man behind the discipline, the one who walked through muddy camps, spoke gently with soldiers, cared for the sick, and met every hardship with reason and humility. His life had been a testament to the belief that leadership required not power alone, but virtue, patience, and a steadfast commitment to the welfare of others. By the end of this chapter, Marcus Aurelius, soldier, philosopher, emperor, had completed the final duty of his life. His story now turned toward remembrance, legacy, and the long echo of a life devoted to reason and justice. In the days following the death of Marcus Aurelius, a quiet stillness settled across the frontier. Soldiers continued their patrols, Envoys still arrived with reports, and the daily rhythms of the camp persisted, but something had changed. The presence that had shaped their lives for so many years was gone. Marcus had not ruled through spectacle or intimidation. His leadership had been calm, measured, and deeply human, and the absence of that steadying presence was felt in subtle, unmistakable ways. Officers spoke with softer tones. Soldiers carried out their duties with a reflective quiet. It was as though the camp itself paused to absorb the weight of what had passed. Rome responded with similar solemnity. Word of Marcus's death spread slowly through the city, carried across streets, into markets, temples, and homes. Citizens remembered an emperor who had guided them through plague, famine, war, and uncertainty. His reputation was not built on conquest or wealth, but on character, on the clarity of his decisions, the humility of his manner, and the enduring sense that he had always sought the greater good. Even those who had never seen him in person felt the significance of his loss. He represented an ideal of leadership that brought comfort during times of hardship. The Senate honored Marcus with thoughtful praise, recognizing his decades of service and the steadiness he had maintained in the face of relentless challenges. They remembered a leader who respected the Senate's role, communicated openly, and upheld tradition while also embracing the practical reforms necessary for stability. Amid the formal ceremonies and public expressions of grief, senators spoke privately about Marcus's wisdom, how his presence during debates had brought clarity to difficult topics, how his willingness to listen shaped decisions that balanced diverse needs. His leadership had elevated the tone of governance, reminding them of the responsibility they carried. Across the provinces, communities reflected on the changes Marcus had brought. Some remembered him as the emperor who traveled through frontier towns offering reassurance during campaigns. Others remembered his policies, grain support during difficult winters, fair tax reforms, and his insistence on justice, even in remote regions. Marcus had lived a life shaped by duty, and the results of that duty had touched millions across the empire. His influence extended beyond borders, reaching neighboring tribes who respected his consistency and his preference for diplomacy over unnecessary conflict. Even among former adversaries, his death was acknowledged with quiet respect. Yet the legacy Marcus left behind was complex. He had guided the empire through some of the most difficult years in its history, years marked by pandemic, war, migration, and political strain. The decisions he made, the alliances he forged, and the reforms he implemented had strengthened Rome during his lifetime. But he also understood the fragility of stability. He knew that his passing created uncertainty, and he had tried to prepare the empire for a smooth transition. The succession of his son, Commodus, represented the continuity Marcus believed necessary, yet even Marcus recognized the unpredictability of human character. Still, Marcus's hope rested not in individual rulers, but in the systems, principles, and habits he had tried to reinforce. He believed that strong institutions, supported by reason and justice, could guide the empire even when circumstances were difficult. He had worked to preserve unity, encourage responsible governance, and support philosophical education, efforts aimed at shaping the minds and character of those who would inherit the world he served. As citizens reflected on Marcus's reign, many gravitated toward the quiet writings he left behind. Though never intended for public view, his meditations began to circulate among scholars. They found wisdom in his reflections on mortality, responsibility, humility, and the transient nature of human life. These writings revealed the inner world of an emperor who had always sought clarity amid chaos, who reminded himself daily to hold virtue above comfort, and who practiced patience, not as a performance, but as a way of living. Through these writings, Marcus's voice continued to guide Rome long after his passing. The legions along the frontier mourned in their own way. They remembered him as the emperor who walked the muddy paths between tents, who listened to their concerns, who cared for the wounded, and who faced the same winter winds they endured. They had followed him not out of fear but out of trust. Even after his death, that trust remained, shaping the discipline and unity that had grown under his leadership. By the end of this first part, Marcus Aurelius' legacy had begun its journey from present memory into history. His life, marked by virtue and restraint, now existed in stories told by soldiers, citizens, and scholars. The world he left behind was still uncertain, shaped by challenges he could not resolve perfectly, yet strengthened by the wisdom and steadiness he had offered throughout his reign. In the months that followed Marcus Aurelius' passing, his influence settled over the empire like a gentle, enduring echo. The institutions he supported continued to function, the treaties he negotiated remained largely intact, and the legions he strengthened persisted in their duty. Rome entered a period of transition, uncertain yet guided by the stability Marcus had worked tirelessly to protect. Commodus assumed leadership, inheriting an empire secured through decades of discipline and sacrifice. Marcus had hoped that the structure he established would support his son, providing clarity and continuity. Early in Commodus's reign, many of Marcus's experienced advisors remained active, offering guidance shaped by years of partnership with the former emperor. Their presence helped maintain order, and for a time, Marcus's influence continued subtly through the systems he had put in place. Across the provinces, life resumed its familiar rhythms. Farmers returned to fields once disrupted by war. Markets reopened and trade routes revived, carrying goods across vast distances. Communities rebuilt homes, repaired roads, and restored temples damaged during conflict. In these simple acts of renewal, the empire demonstrated the resilience Marcus had always believed in, the quiet strength of ordinary people living through extraordinary times. Scholars and teachers continued to study Marcus's philosophical reflections, incorporating his thoughts into lectures and discussions. They admired his ability to balance personal humility with imperial responsibility, finding in his writings a rare combination of practicality and introspection. His meditations offered guidance for leaders and citizens alike, reminding them to focus on what they could control, to accept the impermanence of life, and to strive always toward virtue. In distant regions, tribal groups that had negotiated peace with Marcus remained largely cooperative, honoring the agreements established during his final years. They remembered him as a leader who had listened with patience and treated them with fairness. His diplomatic approach contrasted with the harsher methods employed by some earlier emperors, and his legacy among these communities carried an unusual sense of mutual respect. Meanwhile, the soldiers who had served under Marcus carried his memory with them as they continued their duties. They spoke of him around fires during quiet nights, telling stories of the campaigns, the winter hardships, and the moments of calm leadership that had given them strength. To them, Marcus was not just a distant emperor. He was a presence they had seen with their own eyes, a man who had shared their hardships and approached each challenge with steadiness. Yet Marcus's legacy extended beyond those who lived during his reign. His writings, preserved through generations, became foundational texts for thinkers, leaders, and philosophers long after the Roman Empire itself had transformed. They inspired discussions about ethics, leadership, and resilience. His meditations became a companion for individuals navigating the pressures of life, offering insights written in a tone that felt both timeless and deeply personal. Through these writings, Marcus continued to guide minds centuries beyond his lifetime. Over time, historians would look back on Marcus Aurelius as one of Rome's last great emperors, a ruler who combined intellect with empathy, strength with restraint, and power with humility. His reign became a benchmark against which others were measured. Though not free from flaws or limitations, his leadership stood out for its consistent moral grounding. He had embodied the Stoic principles he valued, not as a distant ideal, but as a daily practice shaped by the complexities of real governance. As Rome moved forward, shifting through eras of stability and turmoil, Marcus's legacy remained a quiet anchor in the collective memory of the empire. His life offered a reminder that leadership, at its best, was not defined by wealth or conquest, but by clarity, responsibility, and the courage to act with virtue even when circumstances were harsh. By the end of this second part, Marcus Aurelius existed fully in history. His body returned to the earth, his influence carried by ideas, stories, and the steady inspiration he left behind. His reign had closed, but his presence continued, not through the power he once held, but through the wisdom he had shared. And so the story of Marcus Aurelius comes to its quiet end. His life was lived not in pursuit of grandeur, but in pursuit of understanding, not in the shadow of fear, but in the light of discipline. He endured plague, war, loss, and uncertainty, and met each hardship with a clarity that steadied an empire. Through every storm, he carried the conviction that virtue was not an ideal reserved for philosophers, but a practice shaped by each moment's choices. Marcus leaves behind a legacy of calm leadership, steady judgment, and a moral compass that remained true even when the world around him shifted. His writings whisper across time, offering gentle reminders about resilience, humility, and the beauty of simplicity. They reflect the heart of a man who lived as both ruler and student, forever seeking to understand himself, his duty, and the nature of the world. As this documentary chapter closes, we are left with a sense of quiet appreciation. Marcus Aurelius did not seek to be remembered, yet history remembers him not for the power he wielded, but for the wisdom he carried, the patience he practiced, and the serenity he brought to a life filled with challenges. His journey reminds us that calm leadership is possible even in difficult times, and that the strength of one's character can shape the world long after the individual is gone. Thank you for listening to the life of Marcus Aurelius, a philosopher, a leader, and a timeless voice of clarity.